Call the roll.
Ms. Bumke?
Here.
Mr. Cavalier?
Here.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Mr. Dutenheffer?
Here.
Mrs. Maurer?
Here.
Ms. Shelton?
Here.
Mr. Snellings? Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And I just want to let people know that Mr. Snellings had a family emergency today, so he will not be with us. Thank you. My name is Meg Bomke. I represent the Falmouth District and serve as the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I would like to thank Sheriff Decatur, Fire Chief Joe Cardello, and the staff for the very moving 9/11 ceremony that we held last week. It really is hard to believe that it's been 17 years ago, and obviously a very, very tragic event that none of us will ever forget. On the behalf of the Board of Supervisors, I would like to congratulate Dan Reichart. Mr. Reichart is a 5th grade teacher at Kate Waller Barrett Elementary School who was named Teacher of the Year at a recent event attended by Governor Ralph Northam. Dan is one of 8 regional teachers of the year and was also named the Washington Post 2018 Teacher of the Year. He will compete with the other regional teachers for the statewide honor, and that winner will be eligible to be named National Teacher of the Year. Congratulations to Mr. Reichart. You are a credit to Stafford County and a blessing to our students. Will Miss Alicia Hilmer please join me on the dais? Miss Hilmer is the Constitutional Week Committee Chairman for the Daughters of the American Revolution, and we are here to recognize Constitutional Week, September 17th through the 23rd, and yesterday was National Constitution Day. So please come up. And we also have Miss Martha Newton, who is also a member of this chapter. So I have a proclamation I'd like to present to you all. Whereas September 17th, 2018 marks the 229th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America by the Constitutional Convention. And whereas it is fitting and proper to celebrate the longest surviving written charter of government, and whereas the Constitution played a significant role not only in American history, but the spread of democratic ideals around the world. And whereas 2 of America's and Stafford's most revered native sons, George Washington and George Mason, attended and had significant impacts on the Constitutional Convention of 1787. And whereas George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which became the basis for the Bill of Rights, and then became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And whereas federal law number 915 guarantees the issuance of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States designating Constitution Week. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Stafford County Board of Supervisors on this the 18th day of September 2018 that it be and hereby does proclaim September 17th through the 23rd, 2018 as Constitution Week in Stafford County. And be it further proclaimed that Stafford citizens are encouraged to reaffirm the ideals of our founding fathers by vigilantly protecting the freedoms guaranteed to us through this guardian of our liberties, the Constitution of the United States of America. So thank you so much for what you do with the American Daughters of the Revolution, and would you like to make a few comments?
Sure, thank you. Constitution Day, celebrated each year on September 17th, is an important reminder to the citizens of the world of the impact and value of the American experiment in self-government. As we honor one of the most influential legal documents in the world, it is vital that we remember to share the Constitution with our youth and our new citizens so they know the rights and freedoms it guarantees them. It is the duty of every American citizen to protect and defend the Constitution and to protect America as a beacon of liberty to the world. On behalf of the Falls of the Rappahannock Chapter, National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, I would like to thank the Board of Supervisors for recognizing Constitution Week with this proclamation for Stafford County. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for coming. Here it is. You want to get a picture? The first order of business is approving of our meeting agenda. Let's see, we do have changes to the minutes.
Madam Chair, I move to approve with the changes to the minutes.
All right.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. It's there. Okay, motion passes 6 with 1 absent. Now we have presentations by the public. Please remain courteous and respectful to members of the audience and to the board. It's important to keep track of your time at the podium so everyone who wishes to speak has time. If you're here to speak about tonight's public hearing, which we only have one, you could wait until 7 o'clock to address your comments then. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. Speak slowly and clearly into the microphone and begin by stating your name and address. Please refer to the light on the podium to monitor your time. Green indicates the start of your remarks. Yellow indicates that you have 1 minute to summarize your comments, and red means, obviously, that your time is up. So at this point in time, I do have 2 speaker cards. We'll start with them, and then I'll open it up to others in the board chambers. So the first is Mr. Jim Fry.
Board members, good evening, staff. My name is Jim Fry. I live at 13 Bob White Lane, Quiet District, Stafford County. I've lived there for 49 years, and in all my time, I've never seen anything as reckless and as ridiculous as the 2 proposed resolutions to amend the county ordinance.
Excuse me, Mr. Fry, could you pull the microphone over in front? Thank you so much.
I've lived here for over 49 years, and in all my time, I have never seen anything as reckless and ridiculous as the 2 proposed resolutions to amend the county ordinance and remove the setback for an establishment of the new cemeteries. The ordinance passed unanimously when it was being voted on as a policy alone until one of the supervisors realized it may benefit a contributor or contributors. Now, I'm a retired Prince William County criminal investigator, formerly with the police department, and I can tell you that the DOJ complaint letter that you got, I don't believe there's any violation at all. I believe that the complaining party is nothing more than a 501c3 organization who sells graveyard sites to specific religious groups. They made a bad land deal, and now they're trying to get out of it. No one cares what religion wants to put in a cemetery. What we do care about is that it doesn't impact the water quality or property values. I'm a realtor in Stafford County, and I can tell you that the board must require BOS approval to establish cemeteries to minimize impact on cemeteries. And cemeteries have a major impact on property values, and is seen in the studies done by the Planning Commission that I'm sure you all have had a chance to read. There is scientific evidence that cemeteries impact public safety and drinking water, and it is no coincidence that a lot of the major countries in Europe already require a 900-foot standard setback. The Chapawamsig fault line runs down Garrisonville Road, and it's responsible for the water running from the west to the east and down Aquia Creek, and Aquia Creek into Smith Lake. And Smith Lake is where we get all our drinking water. 30,000 plus citizens get their drinking water there. And then once it goes out of Smith Lake, it goes back into the creek, into the Potomac River, and into the Chesapeake Bay. Had had this 501c3 that's complaining done its due diligence, they would have realized they couldn't bury bodies on that property anyway. Instead, they just made a bad real estate deal, and we're all sad for that. I'm very supportive of my newly elected supervisor to a quiet district, Cindy Shelton. And I must tell you that this ordinance has been studied exhaustively
Mr.
and
Fry,
needs no
can
changes.
you wrap up your comments, please?
I will. Do not let a 501c3 organization use the DOJ to strong-arm you into reversing yourself. There is no case, but your residents absolutely have a case, and I'm asking each of you, especially my supervisor in the quiet, to protect all of Stafford County property values and drinking water and vote 1 on the option. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Next is Mr. David Silver.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is David Silver. I reside at 2 Skywood Court in the Rock Hill District. First, I would like to thank the Planning Commission on the thorough and scientific work they did on the report. Thankfully, your Planning Commission understood the rights, public safety, and the welfare of the residents in the county. All residents in Stafford County should have equal protection under the law. The county tests and treats the public water. They don't test and treat the private wells, which puts us in a more vulnerable position with our drinking water. Considering this, I don't understand why the county would protect residents who are on the county water to a higher degree than those of us in rural areas. How is it not a form of discrimination, especially since we are considering a lower standard for a more vulnerable population? We should have equal protection under the Stafford County laws. At what point is this board going to treat everyone equally? I have hired counsel to represent me on the issue, Robert Nealon. These changes are a violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution under equal protection of the law. We are especially looking at the potential collusion of certain members of the board and the AMAA. In addition to the false discrimination claims the AMAA has made against my neighbors and I. The county should not allow one group's special interest to impact the policies of all the residents. Additionally, my house is less than 250 feet from this property, according to the Virginia state law, and not just the county ordinance. My signature and approval must be established prior to establishment of the proposed cemetery. I do not understand why you would create a discriminating ordinance at the request of the AMAA when it still wouldn't allow them to put their cemetery on Garrisonville Road, because I will not provide my signature or approval unless this board intention is to turn a blind eye to the law like they did with the Brook Road Cemetery. I'm asking that you all end this now and vote yes to keep the ordinance intact. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker card I have is Glenn Patterson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Supervisors. My name is Glenn Patterson. I reside at 8 Skywood Court in the Rock Hill District. Ever since then, Supervisor Paul Mildy sent the cemetery ordinance back to the Planning Commission for review. I've wondered what his rationale was, since it had been passed unanimously by both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors less than a year before. In fact, Supervisor Mildy was the one who made the motion to adopt it. I was also curious about the AMAA's continuing contention that religious discrimination was involved in crafting the ordinance, since I had not seen nor heard any evidence which would support that. So I began to submit FOIA requests to try and see what it was that I was missing. And I did find it. Pay to play was the missing piece of the puzzle. Supervisor Mildy violated the Government Conflict of Interest Act by not recusing himself from all board actions related to the cemetery ordinance once the AMAA made their specific request to rescind it in September of 2017, since he was the recipient of more than $4,000 in donations from the AMAA in 2012 alone. In fact, he's the one who raised the issue of sending it back to the Planning Commission, something he should have given a wide berth. The AMAA request was not based on scientific evidence, but rather in a desire to make up for their lack of due diligence in purchasing the Garrisonville Road property to begin with. They never contacted all affected residents to get the consent required under Title 57 of the Code of Virginia. I know that since I'm one of them. And they've not contacted me. They also, to this day, have not submitted an application to establish a new cemetery, nor taken any of the actions required by state law, not county, state law, to do so. Why would they? Pay to play was in effect. It's all readily available on the county webpage and in the documents I received in my latest FOIA request, and I'm nowhere near finished going through them. I fully expect to see other shenanigans unfold once I have. This, by the way, is all information which was readily available to the Freelance Star for inclusion in their several articles and editorials if they had even considered doing some real reporting rather than being a purveyor of fake news by just running with the talking points that were apparently provided to them by the AMAA and their counsel and never attempting to report the other side of the story. It's really amazing what you can find in a FOIA request if you look hard enough, something the Freelance Star could and should have done but didn't. In addition to Mr. Mildy, there's Supervisor Gary Snellings, who resides directly across the street from the Sunrise Lake Memorial Garden, the cemetery that the AMAA, through Clark Lemming, is negotiating to have the county purchase as a means of settling the DOJ investigation. He should recuse himself from any further actions on this ordinance because of the direct benefit he derives from it. And speaking of that investigation, why is Beth Pepper, the DOJ legal counsel who is leading it, trying to insert herself into the negotiations between the county and the AMAA's legal counsel, as evidenced by an August 29th email asking what the status of negotiations is? Her sole charter is to determine whether there was discrimination, religious or otherwise, in the crafting of the cemetery ordinance.
Mr. Patterson, could you please summarize your comments?
Okay. From the FOIA documents I've received, I can verify that there was not, nor was there a RLUIPA violation. So supervisors, please select option 1 on agenda item 12 before you today, and let's finally put this behind us. Thank you.
At this point in time, I have no more speaker cards. If anyone else from the dais, from the board chambers would like to come and speak to the board, please come forward.
Real audience today. Golly. Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane. It's on my shirt. I'm in the gerrymandered Rock Hill District. Used to own property in the gerrymandered Garrisonville District and still own property in the gerrymandered Griffiths Whitewater District. Hey, I was at Amy's the other day. I didn't realize you could run as an independent in this county. It's pretty good. Well, let's start off by move that bus. Oh, I mean, move that church. This church is in Woodbridge, coming to our latest and greatest $66 million school. You know, the one that you tore down $39 million with $10 million of fiber optics that could have been used for a VOTEC. Golly, that's one good thing Mildy did do, but he didn't win on that one. Oh, Hurricane Florence. That's my mom's name. Her name was Florence Frances Karowski Waldowski Naparella. The reason for the Waldowski, she married my dad twice. I bet you're laughing at that one, huh? Pretty good, huh? But she protected me, see. She went around Virginia and stayed below my brothers and sisters in western New York. Now, as you know, I'm always here because I don't get my county water and sewer bill. And I kind of figured it out because we don't have any deputy county administrators in the 1980s. God, if we had those guys, we might be able to get stuff done. But now we got Public Works. You know, the Utility Commission still exists. It needs to go away. You're just wasting money. And you mentioned 17 years today. You know, 17 years is the 17-year cicada. I'm the chairman of the cicadas of 2030, okay? That's when they're going to get their PhD, a public high school diploma, just like mine. Now, I'm glad the sheriff's in the audience because we do have an issue. This is not an opportunity. This is an issue. Empty sheriff cars. They're over $100,000. We need to get someone in those empty sheriff cars. It's just amazing, especially if that water gets too high. Man, that car might float away. Never know. Saw the Verizon guy in Rock Hill the other day. They one of those Quest public utilities had to bail out all the water because they don't know how to put in French drains. And I didn't know if I was going to come back tonight, but you know, after hearing today about equal protection and county water versus rural water, man, and the 14th Amendment, remember, Lady Justice has a blindfold, not a pirate's patch. You guys all wear one on the left eye because you favor the right.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board? Please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, the rest of the board. My name is Daniel Raja. I'm a resident at 10 Kip Court, Stafford, Virginia. I'm a board member of the AMAA and a resident of Stafford County since 2005. Our organization would like to thank the Board of Supervisors for your continued review of the cemetery ordinance, as well as thank you for the overall service you provide to Stafford County. Many of our members make their home in Stafford County, and we invite anyone who is interested to visit the cemetery on Brook Road. We support the approval of option 3, which is described by Jeff Harvey as the version which would match existing state law, removing the provisions in the 2016 cemetery ordinance that exceeds the Virginia Code requirements. I thank you all for your time. You all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board? Please come forward. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to board members. And just want to remind board members, if you have anything, just remember that you want to pull off the consent. Just remember to bring that up during your report.
Mrs. Maurer.
I have a lot to say on some of these other agenda items. For the first time, I'm going to defer.
Ms. Shelton.
Yay. And so I don't, for the first time, I feel like I'm not going to defer because I had a lot that went on in the last couple of weeks. And so first of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Stafford County. I attended the COVID convention down in Richmond and was blessed to see a full house of individuals watching our own CTO, Mike Cannon, talk about, you know, smart communities. And that's something we want to do in Stafford when we build our new downtown center. So it was really interesting to see how focused the rest of Virginia is on that. And I think they're a little bit behind the curve of us. And it was so neat to see us be on the forefront of that. And same way with Mr. Middlemoser. He was talking about the way that, you know, election systems go. And so this was Stafford County down in Richmond in front of all of the government IT people. So that was pretty cool. And then I got to go to DC and speak at a project management improvement act. People may not be aware of that. It was signed into law by Obama. And it really doesn't have much impact on local government yet. And so the discussion was about how that act would apply to the federal government. And there's a lot of parallels, but I won't share those with you today. And then finally, or not finally, but sorry, I was got blessed, I don't know how, to go to a luncheon in Mount Vernon with Susan Allen and some other women to talk about the new monument that's going to be in Richmond called the Voices of the Garden. It's about the women in Virginia and the contributions that they've made. And I can't wait to see that monument built. And then let's not forget that this is National Hispanic Heritage Month. We'll have a proclamation on that later on today. And I did have a conversation for the quiet people. I'll focus on you guys directly now. With FirstNet, on the 27th of, September, is our normal Acquire Roundtable. We'll be bringing together the results of the survey that we've done. If you recall, that we've done a survey going door to door in mailings to all the individuals that live in the Marlboro Point area to get an understanding of what their telecommunications need. I did that as a citizen, not as a board member, but we'll be bringing back all those results to the community so we can understand what our options are going to be. And that will be discussing cell through FirstNet as well as other wireless opportunities. And in addition, I met today with DSS. I enjoyed that meeting. It was my first time to spend the time to truly understand the role that they provide in our local communities, even though it's supported by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that concludes my comments.
Mr. Cavalier.
I'll defer.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. Very quickly, I just want to give a great amount of praise to all the staff and volunteers who made Yankees in Falmouth happen. We had a great deal of work by staff to clean up the area so that it could be parked in, and I thank Mr. Foley and staff for everything they did to make that happen. It was rather ironic that it rained throughout the weekend, considering that it was rain that caused us so much angst in the first place, but it was a great success, and it was really wonderful to see it go to happen, and thank you. Again, as Ms. Shelton said, we are in Hispanic History Month. Yesterday was Constitution Day, and it's all the schools throughout the country have to deal with Constitution Day because the federal law requires that, and it is a perfect example of the supremacy clause of the Constitution that the federal government demands that we deal with it and spend a day on it, and so we are required to. So just by talking about Constitution Day, we are showing part of the Constitution. Upcoming this weekend, the Bethlehem Primitive Baptist Church is having a ceremony. It has received a historic marker. This county has worked very hard, and I thank Mr. Foley and Mr. Holden and others for their work in making this happen. It's at 1 p.m. on 135 Chapel Green Road. The Bethlehem Primitive Baptist Church is 150 years old, and that is quite an accomplishment considering what the founders of that church have had to deal with in that 150 years. Lastly, at our last meeting, I erred, and I believe in being forthright. I tell the people I hang around with all day, when you make a mistake, you should say it. Chief Cardello gave a report at our last meeting and cited many of the things that he has implemented that were brought forward to him by the volunteers and by the paid staff, and that he's already implementing. And I was a little stunned that we didn't say anything, but he deserves a great deal of praise for actually doing things to improve our fire and rescue services and listening to the people in the system as far as trying to make changes. And so I praise him for that. And that ends my report. Thank you.
Mr. Dudenheffer.
I'm one of the county representatives on the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, FAMPO as we call it. And while they're having significant changes now with new personnel and people on board, one thing I just want to say is I often hear from people that we don't plan for transportation. We don't plan for development. We're not forward-leaning in planning. I can assure you that in the transportation world of FAMPO, I mean, we project out transportation needs out to 2040 at this point. And if anyone wants to see those plans, all they have to do is go on the FAMPO website, and they're very comprehensive, they're very detailed. Unfortunately, they are also governed by how much money we get to actually build what we've projected our needs are, but it isn't for lack of significant trying. So I've been a supporter, a reluctant supporter over the years of the express lanes, because that's it was put to me at the time, back 10 years ago, that it's this or nothing. We don't have the billions of dollars it takes to build the express lanes. Well, as you know, the express lanes now are going to continue from its terminus just south of Garrisonville Road all the way down to the new Rappahannock River bridges that are starting construction. I was very, very disappointed in hearing and seeing that their preliminary and their plans now do not allow for a southern access point for the people in North Stafford. The only access point heading south through the whole 10 or more miles in Stafford County are way up north, almost by Quantico. So anyone in Stafford who wants to go south on the express lanes, which are supposed to alleviate all the traffic, would have to drive all the way up to Russell Road and U-turn and come back on the interstate to get on. I find that to be a slap in the face, really, to the Stafford County residents who pay into that project. So I'd like to have item number 8 pulled off, just so I can talk to it a little bit that relates to what I'm talking about here. So thank you. That concludes my remarks.
And Ms. Baumke.
Yes, thank you. Yesterday, I attended down at the city of Fredericksburg a new group called Fredericksburg Alive, and it was really fun. They recognized the nonprofits in this region. Obviously, there was not time to recognize all of them, but in addition to that, they recognized the nonprofit work that is being done, as well as the corporate sponsors that are working with the different organizations. And it was just really neat to listen to the corporate sponsors that aren't necessarily giving financial resources, but just giving the labor of labor to different events, different organizations. So it was very, very well attended at the Baptist Church, and I think they'll be doing others. If you're interested in helping any of those organizations or just seeing what's going on, you can look at their website called Fred Alive. But it's not just Fredericksburg, it's for our entire region. This Friday, our board has been invited by the Rappahannock Fredericksburg Rotary Club to participate in the International Day of Peace. It's called an event called Promoting Peace and Civility in Our Community. It's from 7 to 9 at the Fredericksburg Baptist Church, and I know Mayor Greenlaw will be there doing a proclamation. If you'd like more information on that, I'll share that with you. Last night, as Mr. Dudenheffer indicated, we had a FAMPO and a GWRC meeting, and I just want to say that the executive committee of GWRC is going to be meeting with our in-house lawyer to review our current MOUs, memorandums of understanding, and our bylaws with myself, Tim McLaughlin, who's chair of FAMPO, and the current executive director, Linda Millsaps, as well as Paul Agnello, the FAMPO director. And basically, we're just trying to update our structure. It's been quite a while since we've updated our bylaws and looked at our MOUs. And with new personnel that have come on, like Mr. Dudenheffer said, it's a good time to just look over our existing documents and see if there are ways that we can improve. And also, as Ms. Mauer or Ms. Shelton indicated, that this is Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just want to say that we do have a proclamation that we're approving today, and we know that we have about 12% of our population here in Stafford County is the Hispanic population, and they have made significant improvements and what's the word I'm looking for? Contributions. Thank you. Contributions to our community, and they're an integral part of our community, and just wanted to let them know how proud we are to have them as part of our community. And we do have Daniel Cortez, who will be joining us tonight at 7 o'clock. He was actually involved in some really neat presentations at the White House last night regarding Hispanic Heritage Month. So you might have seen those already online. But we have a rich culture and rich history here, and excited that we have this proclamation on our agenda. Lastly, I just want to say that Delegate Thomas And I had a town hall meeting at Conway Elementary School along with Sheriff Decatur and Commissioner of Revenue Scott Majowski that attended. We had a lot of great conversation. There were a lot of questions about the opioid epidemic, but also a lot of conversation about the new federal tax law for the itemization or unitemized tax returns that you'll be completing at the federal level. There is a lot of complication as it relates to your whether or not you will itemize or not itemize in the state of Virginia that could potentially have significant ramifications to your personal tax return in the Commonwealth. The Delegate Thomas is working with his colleagues and the Speaker of the House to maybe see if they can go back into session before the end of this calendar year and try to get this language fixed. And apparently this is affecting about 18 other states in the nation. So we are not unique to this situation. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but if you would like more information, you could go on to our Commissioner of Revenue, Scott Majowski's Facebook page, and he actually walks you through a tax return. And that's all I have. With that, Ms. McClendon, do you have anything to report to the board?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do not.
Thank you. And Mr. Foley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have our fiscal year 2018 year-end financial review here in just a couple of minutes. I did want to mention that as we've done monthly, we've got our priority projects and initiatives report included in your packet. In addition to that, and a highlight on some of the active projects, we've also included your draft strategic plan, which will be coming back to you next month with some clarifications and things for your final review, hopefully to get that adopted by November, and then move forward with really what will be the county's first strategic plan. So just that is in the works and is covered in that report. Just one other highlight from that report. On Thursday of this week, we are going to have 6 employee task forces report back on improvements that they think that we should consider making in the organization. As you recall, we did an employee climate survey at the end of last year. It had about a 65% response rate from all of our employees on things that they thought we were doing well and things they thought we could improve. Rather than just taking those recommendations and acting on them, we actually reached out to the employees and asked them to help us figure out what we needed to do. So those task forces are going to report this week, and that will lead to some more actions in the organization to improve our climate and some of the other things that they've identified. Just wanted you to be aware about the level of employee engagement that we are getting in this organization and how important I think that's going to be for our future. Just one last thing before the financial report. I wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of our staff for their efforts in preparation for Hurricane Florence. Behind the scenes, you all may not see that, but our emergency management staff, all of our public safety folks, and frankly, all the rest of our leadership team are very engaged in preparing this community to deal with a potential disaster. That's a very structured and organized process. We have an emergency operations plan, and we prepare for these types of events. This happened to be a really good exercise for us to go through the routine of that, something we were planning to do anyways. But I just want to thank all of our staff for their efforts. It does take quite a bit. All those things that we do day to day have to stop so that we can get focused on the most important things when these types of events happen. So very fortunate that we didn't feel the effects of that, but just wanted you all to know that we are prepared and we learn from these events and then move on and get better. And we will do that from this event as well. But again, point was just really to thank all our staff for their extra efforts in that event. And with that, Madam Chair, I think we can do our financial review, and Andrea is going to do that as our budget director.
Computer, please.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Andrea Light, Budget Division Director for Stafford County. Under the board's financial policies, Stafford County has again shown positive results of operations. Revenues have exceeded the budget while expenditures were below budget. We were able to fund policy-driven fund balance changes and meet the $3 million dedicated to transportation in the fiscal year 19-28 CIP. This slide summarizes our actual unaudited revenues in comparison with the adjusted budget. The revenues exceeded the adjusted budget. Particularly healthy were the property taxes and local non-property taxes. Building permits, again, remain very strong. We were about 3% higher in actuals in fiscal year 18 than we were in fiscal year 17. And use of money and property was quite strong. Interest revenue across all funds exceeded budget projections and prior year receipts. Field rental revenues also exceeded the budget. It was about 47% higher than fiscal year 2017, and that's a direct result of the fields at Embry Mill and our increased focus on sports tourism in the county. County staff's prudent use of taxpayer dollars is evidenced in the overall expenditure savings. Debt service savings were experienced due to the rates and terms being more favorable and the timing of master lease payments. Like in fiscal year 2017, these funds are fenced off in fund balance for future capital projects. It is anticipated that school debt service savings will be used for school projects and county debt service savings will be used for the courthouse design. In fiscal year 18, we budgeted vacancy savings of $500,000, which is our typical practice and has been done in fiscal year 19, and we were able to achieve that. Health insurance savings was $876,509 in the general fund. Under our financial policies, those funds, we will request from the board to have those funds transferred to the OPEB trust fund upon completion of the audit. The Juvenile Detention Center has a true-up at the end of the year based on our children's participation in that program. This year, Stafford had a little more participation than was budgeted for, and our expense went up to $141,737. As in past practices, we identify public safety savings, for one-time use, and we'll bring that back to the board after the audit is complete. The sheriff had a savings of $172,500, and fire and rescue had a year-end savings of $122,200. Of that, volunteer fire and rescue lines saved about $73,000. As with the fiscal year 17 practice, we recommend putting those in fund balance for the volunteer fire and rescue major repairs. The public day school portion of CSA continues to provide funding challenges. We've ended fiscal year 2018 with about $6 million in expenditures for both private and public day school. The board's financial policies require certain fund balances to be maintained. This summary provides a listing of those increases in fiscal year 2019.
Ms. Light, could you go back to the page on CSA?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so those expenses there for the $6 million, for the private day, well, that includes private and public, because our private day school costs are like $1.5 to $2 million, correct?
The private day school that we have in contract with the public day school, I'm sorry, that we have in contract with the schools is $518,000. It's the private day school, which was about $5.4 million.
Right, but we only pay a portion of that.
Those were Stafford County's expenses, Madam Chair.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I can add
some good news spin on this, which is actually very good news. What we were seeing, so I serve on the CPMT, and these numbers have been very concerning to me, mainly because we were trending higher than the state averages, in addition to higher than on the cost per child, higher than our surrounding jurisdictions. So this is something that staff has really been focusing on why are we spending, significantly more both regionally and statewide. This $52,700 number is good news. And the reason it's good news is because we budgeted $73,000 per child for this budget year. In addition to that, we got a report during the Finance and Budget meeting that indicates that 103 children that we did in 2018, which we projected for the next budget, is now down to 62 children due to a lot of they've either moved out of the district or they've aged out. And so I'm hopeful, cautiously hopeful, that we may have turned the corner on private day school. And it's really is to the credit of staff and Donna Kraus. They have truly been working hard to find some resolution.
The capital reserves have been bolstered by year-end savings from revenue results. In fiscal year 2017, funds were set aside in fund balance from recordation revenue over budget and savings in debt service, like we just talked about, and funding for the courthouse fines for courthouse design fees. At the end of fiscal year 2018, that balance was almost $1.5 million. The fiscal year 2019 CIP, as I said before, has directed $3 million to be programmed into transportation projects. These funds will be available after the audit confirmation. The finance policies direct all unspent funds to be directed to the capital projects reserve. By policy, the county maintains a minimum of $1.5 million in this reserve. Throughout fiscal year 2018, board action and repayments of loans have changed this balance, as well as our year-end positive results of operation. At fiscal year 2018 year-end, our balance is to be considered as part of the overall CIP planning for fiscal year 20 to 28 is $4.2 million. These year-end positive results of operation will be provided to the board, as I said, as part of our CIP considerations, and it's just under 1% of our budget. The board's not asked to take any action on these items today. After the completion of the audit, when the auditors are able to confirm these balances, there may be actions to consider, such as transferring the health insurance savings to the OPEB trust fund in compliance with our financial policies, budgeting and appropriating public safety dollars for one-time capital use, and the budget and appropriation of permit fees that were in excess of expenditures. The school staff is currently finishing their year-end reporting. They also project health insurance savings, much like the county. They're seeing lower than anticipated claims experience, just like we are on the county side. The state has determined they will withhold a portion of the sales tax of about $1.5 million that would normally be accrued in the schools for their June sales tax collection, and they will see that probably in December. The Utilities Fund continues to be fully compliant with all board covenants, all bond covenants and board financial policies. Revenues were above budget to include our user fees, and expenditures were under budget. The Transportation Fund has experienced revenues in excess of the budget, particularly in gas tax, was almost $500,000 over budget. In the fiscal year 2018 budget, the general fund was designated to pay for the debt service of the courthouse road expansion. the fiscal year 18 debt service would have been about $235,000. Due to these increases in revenues above the budget, the general fund did not have to make this transfer to the transportation fund. This slide summarizes our changes in revenues and expenditures and how those changes in revenues and expenditures affected our fund balance. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions for Ms. Light? Okay. Did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to the consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda? Minus item number 8.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent. Mr. Dudenheffer, item number 8.
Thank you. Just a continuation of my comments earlier. I have verbally expressed my disconcern with, or my unhappiness actually, with the lack of a southbound on-ramp into the new express lanes that are going to be built. I'm not sure there's a lot that is going to be able to be done on this, but we're working at it. In a discussion I had last night with VDOT, in their typical overly bending backwards cooperation, blamed the problem on Transurban. And in my previous conversation with Transurban, they blamed it on VDOT. And nobody will meet in the middle and really address this issue. But what we're trying to do here is send a formal letter of concern to the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Valentine, officially expressing our concern that there is not a southbound entrance in Stafford County can be used by Stafford County residents in the 10-mile stretch of express lanes that are going in on Stafford County. So I appreciate the board's cooperation in sending this letter. FAMPO is also going to send a letter. They represent the region, and they are equally concerned as we are. So, Madam Chairman, I move for Resolution 18235.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I just want to say to Mr. Dudenheffer, thank you for bringing this up, and it's really important that we continue to put pressure on the state. Okay, cast your vote, please. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent. We have 2 items that are of unfinished business today. The first is a continuation of the discussion about revisions to the board's bylaws. This item was initially discussed as new business at the board meeting on September 4th.
Madam Chair, I'm going to lead off on this. Rashid and I will cover this issue for you.
Okay.
As you mentioned, we are revisiting this issue after last board meeting's discussion. And at that time, we got some good feedback from you about how you might like to proceed, in particular with the committees. So I'm going to cover the board standing committees and review the things that we heard you say at the last meeting and how we think that's going to play out, and see if that is the direction that you want to take. We're not asking for any action today, but based on today's discussion, hopefully we'll come back with resolutions for you to approve some changes. I realize there's still maybe some discussion on this, and we're looking for that today also. I think in the revision to the bylaws, the language that our county attorney has given you some revisions to, she will also cover some of the things that hopefully you all will give us a head nod on because of last meeting's input. But the things that were unresolved primarily related to the committees. So if I could have the first slide. We had identified previously some of the issues that board members themselves had raised at the strategic planning retreat about things that you thought we ought to consider potentially changing. They revolved around transparency, how the agenda is established, and primarily around how board members get to participate in some of the discussions that happen otherwise at standing committees. Those items are before you. What we heard, if you can go to the next slide, Marcia, was what I've put together here. I've termed it as the board's proposal based on the discussion at the last meeting, and I want to cover that. And when we go through this, you all can correct us if you don't think we've captured it exactly right. What we heard is that all matters for board consideration will first be introduced on the regular agenda of the Board of Supervisors as new business or on the consent agenda. So rather than going to committees first, we will do a full staff report and bring it to this board under new business, unless it's something clearly the whole board supports and we could go straight to the consent agenda. After review by the full board as new business, if not on the consent agenda, items will receive one of the following actions as determined by the majority of the board. After new business, the item could be approved for movement to unfinished business or to the consent agenda for final consideration. The item could be referred to a work session of the full board for review. If that's an item that needs full board discussion, it could go to a work session if not approved. And then thirdly, it could be referred to a standing or ad hoc committee of the board for review. Under this proposal, and this is an area we'll need some clarification, it would mean that you really wouldn't have to change any of your committees. You could leave them as they are, but things would probably be referred to them less often if they're resolved here first. Currently, everything that staff brings forward to committees, a lot of it is staff-driven, things that just have to get handled. And frankly, we think a majority of those could probably just be handled as new business under the regular meeting or on consent agenda even sometimes. But if that's not the case, it's a complicated matter, needs more discussion. It could either go to full board review or to committee review. That's the first part of it. Now let's talk on the next slide.
Okay, Mr.
Question.
Foley, I have a question.
Sure.
Like in public safety, we have status updates from the sheriff's office and the fire and EMS at each meeting. That's the first things we do. That's not something that this board would refer down to a committee. So do we have some sort of consideration to leave those things in place?
Yeah, I think that the sentiment that was heard that we'll need some clarification on is that reports like that are good for the whole board and good for the public at the podium here. It may be that we don't need to do as extensive a report. I'm not sure. We'll be looking for direction from you. But most of the times those reports can be fairly brief, but they would be made to the whole board under this proposal. So nothing would be a standing item on a committee agenda anymore. They would all come here first, and you all could give direction on those items for the future, but we would move first of all to bring them to the full board.
I don't know if that was the intent of our discussions last week. I thought that was only for introducing new agendas to the new agenda items for the committees. Like today, we only had status reports from both the offices, and we were in there for over 40 minutes. So that would mean, and now we'd have 7 people asking questions. So I don't see how that is really a feasible thing to do at each of our meetings or once a month, because it adds probably a good hour to our meeting time.
So one thing that, we might want to consider is, because really all that information that Chief Cardello and the sheriff are reporting is really information for the public. And I agree with you, Mr. Cavalier, that, it does take a long time, but maybe we look at doing quarterly reports to the public at the dais, and those reports would be much more simplified. I know Chief Cardello has been trying to change around his report since he's been here because he's not completely satisfied with the way that report is presented. So I don't see why we couldn't ask them to come and do a report to the public at the dais. But that's my opinion. Everybody here on the board needs to weigh in on that.
Well, it's just that that was not my understanding from the proposal from last meeting. So this is different from what I understood at the last meeting. So I can't support this.
Madam Chair, just for the background of that, I think that these comments came out of the board's strategic planning session. as well as discussion we've had since then. So it is completely up to the direction of this board, but those are items that have been discussed or raised by board members in the past. So whichever way you all want to go, we're just looking for some clarity.
Ms. Shelton?
Yes, I've been seeing multiple times where we have a briefing from public safety and our public safety meeting, and then we have the same meeting and the same information presented to the board. And so I can see that there's some operational efficiencies that we could gain, and I know that Sheriff Decatur and the chief are looking for opportunities to give us the information that's important, not just necessarily all the data they've given us before. So I would like to see some efficiencies there rather than having staff have to brief us twice on the same data.
Okay. Mr. Cohen?
Well, and I agree with that. It doesn't have to just be this one committee, but we had the same briefing twice today in a different committee, and it was excellent news and good news. Perhaps, Mr. Foley, you can find a middle ground. I know in public safety we brought up numerous issues dealing with school security that may be best handled in our subcommittee format, but I do believe that generally maybe on a quarterly basis we get that so people understand it. I think the public doesn't understand some of the larger issues that our law enforcement and EMC and fire are dealing with, which we get to see in the sub. So perhaps there's a middle ground there where certain items would stay at the subcommittee, but then we have that. If the sheriff knows, and we can communicate with the sheriff and the fire chief and find out which would work best for them. But if they know that there's this quarterly one that they're going to give total, then they could gear everything that way. And I think that might still give the opportunity to get some more specificity during the day without it being every meeting. If that's sort of a happy medium.
Okay. All right, Mr. Foley, continue.
And I'll just say, based on this discussion, the items that are just updates, there's a question on how best to handle those. The clear direction, I think, at the last meeting was anything that the board has a decision to make on are things that you'd like to come to the board first, and then it would either be assigned out. But we can revisit how we do updates. And a couple different ideas were there that maybe we can conclude on when we get to the end of this. But if it goes to a work session or standing committee, there's a couple things here before you that we think that we heard or that we're sort of proposing be how those would be handled. Work sessions of the board, work session agenda items will be established by the board at the regular board meeting. After review by the board, work session items will go directly to unfinished business or the consent agenda, and minutes will be taken of all board work sessions. That's a requirement. If the full board meets, we have to do minutes. So just clarifying that. But the idea here is that anything after coming to new business at the regular board meeting that goes to a work session can come out of the work session and go directly to unfinished business or the consent agenda. As it relates to standing and ad hoc committees of the board, again, the board will establish those agendas as a part of the regular meeting. After review by the committee, all agenda items will go directly to the full board as unfinished business with a recommended action. There was some question as to whether items could actually be killed in a committee, and I don't think that that's ever been the intention, but we would like some clarification. I think the idea here is that the full board is going to act ultimately on items, whether the committee recommends against doing it or in favor of doing it or gives you some new way of approaching the item. Items that come through a standing or ad hoc committee, however, as this is proposed, and again, you may feel differently, the thought is that it wouldn't go to the consent agenda because it would only have had one reading in front of the full board under new business. So it goes new business, committee, and then goes to unfinished and won't go directly to consent. Because after the committee works on it, supposedly they're going to bring you back some more information that's helpful. But that will only have been 3 board members. So the full board will need to look at it to make a final decision. unlike what happens with a work session where the full board is
No, wait.
having 2 readings.
Okay, Ms. Mauer?
Yeah, and the only question I have on that is for referrals to the Planning Commission. And we may want to, there's a lot of perturbations that we get through when we go through some of these ordinances. It gets sent to the committee, and they, get into those nitnoid details, but because it has a public hearing both at the Planning Commission and at the Board of Supervisors, maybe we can consider not bringing that back into unfinished business before we refer it to the Planning Commission. I'm just thinking about a time frame on that, but just something to think about.
So, Madam Chair, the clarification there would be is you're proposing that it go straight to the consent agenda, because the board will still have to approve sending it to the Planning Commission as a whole.
Just sending it to the Planning Commission goes on consent because you'll still have public hearings at both levels when it comes back.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
We could easily
That
make
makes
that
sense.
clarification if that's what you all, so you're limiting it to those referrals to the Planning Commission.
Referral Standing Committee, Utilities Commission, anything that's going to involve a public hearing, anything that's going to involve a public hearing, both at whatever commission we have to send it to. So it goes to Utilities Commission gets a public hearing, Planning Commission gets a public hearing, and then if it comes back to us through a public hearing process, I'm just thinking of some efficiencies here.
Right, I hear you. Yes.
And I see the great Mr. Harvey in the back, so you don't have to get up, but does this impact any of those items that have certain time frames that have to be, addressed? And I know there's so many of them, and they're not sticking in my head, but I know you know everything on this, so. I didn't mean to make you get up, I'm sorry.
Madam Chairman, Supervisor Cohen, the timeframes in state code and local ordinance deal with the time limit from when the board sends something to the Planning Commission. The only exception is in the case of a comprehensive plan amendment. If the Planning Commission takes action on a recommendation, then the board has 90 days to follow up on the Planning Commission's recommendation, or you have to start the public hearing process over again.
Thank you. I just didn't want to mess up any time frame on you.
Thank you. What, Ms. Mauer?
So, Madam Chair, some of the wording we may want to consider is that anything that's subject to a future public hearing
Would
Can-
automatically,
could
could
go on to the consent
consent.
agenda. Unless, of course, we get back into our controversial language in here and somebody wants to pull it off. And so we do have controversial language for consent agenda proposed in the bylaws. So if somebody sees it on the consent agenda and says, whoa, I don't like the way this is, they can pull it off
can pull it.
anyway before the formal agenda is finalized
Correct.
and put it to new business if they like.
Yeah, it doesn't prohibit the board from pulling it off anytime they want to, for sure. Okay, matters subject to public hearing coming out of an ad hoc or a standing committee may go directly to the consent agenda. That's easy enough for us to work into this.
Okay.
So those are the ways that the work sessions and standing committees would work. I think you all were considering before eliminating committees, and you still may want to do that. But what we got from the last meeting really doesn't need to require the elimination of any committees. I think it can work pretty well. As long as it comes to you first, you decide where it goes next as a majority. A lot of items that might go through committee and then come to the board, even for new business and unfinished business, now can just be dealt with by the board on the first item under new business before it goes to unfinished. So anyways, I think there's some potential efficiencies there, and you can still have the benefit of your committees digging in more deeply if needed. I will say very quickly, before I go to the next slide, the distinction that you all just made was between action items and informational items. So I heard that we could have quarterly reports on information items, but still have the committees meet every month for any informational items. I'm not sure if there's consensus on that. The other option is just to have the informational items come to the board's regular meeting agenda.
I mean, for me personally, I find that, for example, let's use today as an example. We heard in Budget and Finance the financial review that Mrs. Light just gave at the dais. And so actually, we had a very dynamic discussion and had great questions down there for her and for Maria Parat, the Chief Financial Officer. But now we've all heard it for a second time. And from the community standpoint, they probably thought, well, we weren't really very engaged in the whole process. But if you look at what happened up in ABC, we had a great conversation about a lot of the different numbers. So it seems kind of redundant to ask the same questions again here at the board. So that's why I think this has been a great exercise, because it makes us reflect on what we're doing. And I think that it's in many cases, not all, our staff their staff time could be utilized much more efficiently by, eliminating the committees. And just use them when the board feels that it's necessary, as you have created here with the ad hoc committees. But like in my mind, I feel like, and I know I wasn't able to attend the Public Safety Committee meeting today, but I feel like the sheriff and Chief Cardello have a lot more important things on their plate, and that we have a great working relationship with them and all the constitutional officers, that they can bring things to us when there are issues that either need to be at an ad hoc committee level or in front of the entire board. But I'm willing to listen to what, all my colleagues have to say. Mrs. Maurer.
Yeah. So the doubling up on briefings, that's got to stop. It is. And I agree with Meg on that. And I think one of the things that the school board does, and oh my God, I'm going to quote something that the school board does, so, is they have bylaws and charters for all of their committees. And we might be able to flesh out, like if there is a briefing that's on the agenda for the board, it should not be heard in a committee. So I think we can flesh some of that out in the charters for the committees. And maybe if there are briefings that the committees want that, are not appropriate. There was a period in time, for example, that I was concerned about the reconciliation between the cash from the school side and the board side. Do you guys remember this painful process?
Yes.
Okay, so every month I asked for a cash reconciliation status at the finance and budget until I felt comfortable, and this was something that was brought up in an audit report, until I felt comfortable that we had pulled the thread and solved that problem. That is something you guys don't want to hear. The public's going to look at us like we're crazy. But it was something that was very important to ensure that a problem had been solved as a result of an audit report. So those kinds of nitnoid things that are important, at least this was important to me, can be part of that committee charter, whereas, we're still not getting the double briefing. And I agree, the double briefing it's just exhausting. I'm sorry. I love Andrea and Maria, and they have great information, but we did have a lot more questions in that committee room that would have been helpful for the public. So maybe we can find some sort of happy medium in this and consider a charter process, and I know that you guys are talking about a charter process later on in this.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Cavalier.
And just to go on the whole time sensitivity thing, we did a really good thing in public safety this year in cooperation with the sheriff's office, and stood up that school safety task force. And we turned around that item and put school protection officers in the elementary schools, 2, 3, soon to be here, in a very short time frame, because we were able to singularly focus on that at the meetings. And we had them every month, and we always have that on the agenda. If you're talking about quarterly briefings to this full board, it would take years probably to get something like that accomplished. And, I don't know, but I've been on this board 15 years. I know Mr. Dudenheffer's been on here a long time. And we've seen this board operate in the work session mode and in the committee mode. We both agree committee mode works better. If you think it's going to save time, you're dead wrong. We would always start our meetings at 1 o'clock, and we were here till late at night most times whenever we had the work session methodology. And, you know, the committee system was instituted, and it really streamlined the processes, I thought. And just like every other elected body that functions, they have committee systems. And to do away with that, or to do the changes that you're proposing with this methodology, I think is a huge mistake. But, you know, apparently newer members know better.
Madam Chair, I could.
Yeah, Mr. Foley.
I'll do my last slide whenever the time's appropriate.
Okay. All right, Ms. Shelton. Okay.
I'll wait to the next slide.
And there is just one more, and some of these things we may drift into talking about, so maybe doing this and then turning it back over for final discussion. Additional considerations, I think Jack had raised the idea of additional time at regular board meetings, and I think that's certainly something that needs to be considered. The question is whether the board meeting may potentially need to start a half an hour earlier or an hour earlier for new business items. Again, nothing prohibits you all from moving it to a committee, but the idea is that it will first be considered under regular new business, and there will be a full staff report at that time as well. The question about whether we should hold the 12 to 3 time for committees, work sessions, and even starting the board meeting earlier, I think that's a good idea to see how that plays out if you make changes. Question about whether work sessions and committees will always be held in the board chambers, or is the ABC conference room an option if adequate recording is provided? I think one of the things we've had about committees before was the question about whether we should do full minutes. And there is an audio, but it's not quite as accessible or as easy for citizens, I think, as obviously this room. But it could be made easier. We could actually have video, obviously, and audio in the work session rooms and do minutes as well. It just depends on how you'd like to move forward. This is the issue around transparency. The one challenge in that room is it's obviously not as big as this is, but it's, I think, easier for the board in a work session setting to kind of work through issues and so forth. We believe we can set the chambers, the ABC conference room up in a way that will provide adequate public involvement. But if that determines not to be adequate, we could always move back to this. But just putting that on the table, it seemed fairly absolute at the last meeting that you want to do all of them in here. And so I just wanted to get some feedback from you on that. And the final issue, which probably requires a little bit of discussion outside of what we've been discussing, is school-related committees. They're not in the bylaws identified. It's one of those committees you've established that is ongoing and not as identified. But there currently is a meeting between the school board and Board of Supervisors chair and vice chair every month. There's a joint FAB meeting identified. They don't meet frequently. And then there's the school board joint working committee. And what has happened in the past is we've had conversations going on in those different groups, and sometimes different conversations on the same topic. So the question is whether there's an opportunity here to combine some of that through maybe one working committee that is the go-to committee for all joint issues. This was discussed a little bit at the last Joint Schools Working Committee, and there was some disagreement there about doing that. They wanted some things to go to FAB, joint FAB, and some to go to the working committee. I think the reality is most of the things that happen between the two boards, and I mean most and not all, has to do with funding and budget-related matters and policy. The joint FAB meeting is rarely held, so they're going to need to meet on a more regular basis, and I think the joint working committee would meet less because they won't have funding issues. Or we could just have all of it happen in one committee, and that one agenda could be tied to what the chairs are talking about. But again, there's been a lot of discussion around this issue as well. I know, Madam Chair, we've talked about it a good bit, And Supervisor Cohen has expressed some concerns about 3 committees. So I just put that on the table as well for you all in terms of any additional considerations.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, if we need to eliminate the joint schools working committee and only have a joint FAB, I mean, that works for me. You know, it's the pleasure of the board. What do our peer localities do as it relates to committees?
Committees overall?
No, the committee structure like what we have.
Right, you don't mean just on schools, you mean
No,
generally
no, no, I'm
speaking.
sorry,
Yeah.
unrelated to schools.
Yeah. The, we could do more extensive research, but what we have generally found is that most local boards don't have as structured a committee process as we have in terms of the things going directly to committees. Some do, and there's some good examples out there. I think Loudoun does as well. But what we have found is that that's more of the exception than the rule across, you know, if you looked at all the counties in Virginia. So there are some examples of how it can be done well. It's really your direction, but most have things come to the board and then assign things to committee if it needs more work, or to work session, pretty much what I think you all identified at the last meeting.
Okay. All right, let's see, Cindy and then Ms. Maurer.
Boy, there's a lot to cover there. First of all, I may be new on this board, but I'm not new to boards. And so, yes, new at the local government level. And so there's always communication challenges, and no matter what we do. But there's always an opportunity, especially when you get new, fresh faces, to look at it and see what kind of opportunities. So I like the fact that we're re-looking at what we're doing, all right? So as a new person, I like that part. And so here's one of the things that I observed. And so what I've observed, and I'm going to use an example at the CEDC. At the CEDC, and it's a fictitious example, so don't go try to find it. But it's like an item, an item comes to the CEDC. And so we discuss, and we're like, oh, well, we need more information. So then the staff goes back and they get more information. And then they come back to the CEDC. Remember, this is 3 board members. And so then we talk about it and we're like, okay, well, we need more information. So what happens is you end up with a few months of going through and finding out more information, kind of like what you're describing, Ms. Maurer. And so we finally get it to the point, okay, yeah, we think we're ready for the board. Then it goes to the board, and the board goes, no, we want more information. So really, what I'm really describing is behind the scenes where the public is really not aware, we're having all kinds of conversations that, you know what, I bet the public would really like to weigh in on and kind of guide us, because one of the things that I love about Stafford County, look where we are. We are a community of really, really smart people. It's not just us 7. So I really like to have that public participation. And so what I was going to propose is something kind of a mix between the two, because I like organization and structure almost to a fault. And so I realize that, I'm sorry. And so I like it, but yet what I could see as an opportunity for us is to eliminate 2 of our two of our committees, keep 2 of them, whatever we decide is the best way to do, and then have that opportunity, have that flexible work session in between. So the committees that we think provide us the most value today, we would keep them. And we decide, of course, what those are going to be. And then we also, at that same day, we have a work session for whatever that's going to be. The advantage is it gives us a lot more flexibility. And so we're not always having to, and we're discussing it in public. And I want my citizens to come in and weigh in on these things. And so I think that any opportunity that we can to talk more freely in front of them would be a great success for all of us.
All right, thank you. Ms. Maurer.
So in relation to the school committees, I think that they should be very much like our regional committees. We don't have FAMPO, we don't have PRTC, we don't have any of those other committees where we are gathered with outside organizations in our bylaws. So having those in our bylaws, I think they run along the same line, because they're with an organization that's not related to the Board of Supervisors, including them in the bylaws. And if the board wants to combine them, cut them, I don't think that's a bylaw discussion. I think that's just a board discussion. Because keep in mind, it takes 2/3 of us to change these bylaws. So if you put those 3 committees or 4 committees or whatever school committees are in our bylaws, number one, we don't have, they could change it and then we're stuck. We have to change our bylaws because they've decided to go a different route. So on that point, I think we should keep school committees out of the bylaws. But for taking the 4 committees down to 2 committees, I just don't I just don't agree. And the reason is all 4 of those committees do distinctly different things. And one of the things that I've been incredibly proud about this board this year is the amount of deep dive research that has been going on these issues. For example, we're working on some transportation analysis, and staff is doing that. That's appropriate for infrastructure committee. And you know, changes to ordinance, the whole dog licensing thing was very, very appropriate for CEDC to kind of go through that. And yes, the public is interested in dog licensing. I get that, but all the perturbations that go through something as, you know, important, but maybe not as consequential as, let's say, the CIP mapping that we're doing for, you know, how we're weighting projects, which is why we have that committee system to kind of look at more of those routine issues and kind of hone those in, but we still have that work session option. And so we could, you know, under our current way that we're working, we could have sent the weighting for the CIP that was very, very important to Ms. Shelton, and it's very important to all of us, back down to FAB. But it is appropriate for a work session, and we have that flexibility in these bylaws that are presented. And I do appreciate, you know, there is nothing worse than getting 7 people to agree on anything. And the one thing that I can say about this board that has been incredibly impressive is that we're never the same 4-3. And so now we're trying to agree on a rules of engagement for all of us who are never a straight voting block. And I think the more flexibility that we offer, but by making it to where we're sending stuff to the committees, that brings it to the public first. And if the public wants to get involved, they know it's there. And they can reach out to their board member, hey, what's the status update on that? What's the status update on that? But we had dog licensing before us at least 5 times in CEDC. And I'm not certain the public wants to see dog licensing before this full board 5 times. We've got people here in the audience who are waiting for their issue. And if we went through all of these issues one at a time, we wouldn't get anybody here because they wouldn't want to wait. And and so we've got to be very careful in how we bring, you know, starting the issue here at the board and then letting it go through the process and the machinations at the committees is critically important, not just for staff time, but also for the public's time.
And it could be that an item could be on the consent agenda to send to a committee. If it's clear that the board all thinks that that's where it should go, that's an option without even having to have a discussion. It may go directly to the committee, but action will happen first here.
So I mean, we are not voting on this today, but I feel pretty strongly that, you know, I feel we're doing a lot of business, you know, up in ABC, and the public does not have an opportunity to be engaged in what we're doing. And that's my biggest reason for this change. And because we do want our community engaged in what we're doing. That's what it's all about. But anyway, we can, would everybody like to see this for action at the next meeting? What is the will of the board?
And again, Madam Chair, just to be clear about this, since there was a little bit of, Shell, I don't know if you can go back to the first slide very quickly, but we seem to get clear direction from you before that, I'm sorry, it's the next slide. All matters will come before the board first. Mm-hmm. That's the first clarity here. I think there's been a majority that wanted to do that. We've talked about the decisions where it might go after that. The work sessions and the standing committees, they talked about where it will go afterwards. We got a clarification I think Ms. Maurer articulated a way that things can go from consent from a committee under certain conditions, those being that it'll go to public hearing. I think the only question I think that maybe is unclear for staff is informational items coming to the board, whether they're going to come directly to the board or not, or those would be regular items for committees. Just wanting to be sure that we're clear on that, because I know there was some disagreement. So, Madam Chair, that's the main thing. We did ask about whether you're comfortable with having some of the work sessions and committee meetings in ABC. Mm-hmm. And would you like those to have minutes and video?
Madam Chair, the way the bylaws are outlined, it provides either option. And so I think that gives us enough flexibility in order, and it also says in the new bylaws, and Rashida, you really kind of captured everything on this. I'm quite impressed, but also what it says in the bylaws, which was a change, is that we would try, our intention is to have them in the board chambers. However, it still gives us that flexibility if it's just not feasibly possible. Keep in mind so the way the board bylaws are written do provide some flexibility in that. My preference is as much transparency as possible. However, poor Marcia, having to do all of those minutes for all of those committees, but we should also have really good audio available if we're not doing minutes. And it shouldn't take, it shouldn't be that hard to get it to where, somebody's got to, so we've got to find an easier way to make that audio available if we are not, going to provide minutes. But all of that is that flexibility is outlined in the bylaws as they were drafted, which I do appreciate.
Well, that's helpful to clarification. I think I'm seeing heads nodding on that. So we'll have some flexibility in there. Try to make sure there's a clear record, and if it's not accessible enough, make it more accessible. But there's not a hard and fast rule that everything has to be video, audio, and minutes, is what I'm getting out of that comment.
With a 2/3 change, I think a little bit of flexibility on that is easier.
And if, the board is supportive of these bylaws at our next meeting, if that's what we choose to do, maybe we say it's a pilot program for a year, and we, reevaluate after a year, and who knows, maybe we go back to the other way, or maybe we love the new system, and we can have staff input at that point in time as well. Ms. Shelton?
I have one more question. Would that include video as well? And because one of the criticism, and peace and love to all the school board members, but one of the criticisms I hear a lot is that their work sessions are in private. And so you have to go to the work sessions to actually hear the discussions between the school board members. And so, and same way with some of their subcommittees. And so I'm not saying that they're the gold standard or really trying to throw them under the bus, which is kind of funny when you think about it, but it's because they're the school board members, sorry. And so it's, yeah, you got it. Okay, I got it. All right, but my point is that if we could have some additional flexibility to include video, if we determine that it's cost effective for us to do so, then I would like us to consider that as an option.
We'll evaluate the cost of doing that in the work session room in ABC and bring some more information back to you as we bring it back for final decision.
Mr. Cavalier.
I don't know, maybe I was at a different meeting than everybody else the last time, but my takeaway were three things in particular. Was that, one, we would keep the committee system that we had, hold all the meetings here that would be visible to the public and aired if possible, and have work sessions also that would be made in this room so that all our meetings would be visible to the public, as inside and outside of this chamber. So, there's a lot of stuff added to what was discussed the last time in terms of, eliminating committees. Now we're talking about not having anything on the agendas and bringing quarterly things to here. So all those things were changed from what I heard at the last meeting. And so I'm just wondering how we came to this point. And it seems like, I just think you're asking for really, really long meetings. And plus, we all signed up for committees at the beginning of the year knowing full well our committee structure. To change that midstream is wrong. Plus, we won't match up with the school board committees anymore. We have the joint committees with the FAB and the joint schools and, of course, the chair, vice chair, as well as the CIP oversight committee that wasn't mentioned before, too. So all this stuff is collateral damage if you decide to do away with committees or the way we run them. So I don't think changing this year is a good idea. If you want to make these changes, then do it at the beginning of the year when we appoint new committee members and we know full well what system we're going in, and you sign up for committees that you're interested in and that you want to be on because you know that that's going to be that way for the 1 year period. And that's all we do committees. We do committee adjustments every single year. New chairman, new members, the whole 9 yards. So to change it this year, again, huge mistake.
Mrs. Mauer?
Okay. So Mr. Cavalier brings up an excellent point. Ms. Rashida, can we do an effective date?
Yes, we can establish an effective date. When the board considers this and passes a resolution, we could put the effective date potentially for the committee structure or the entire bylaws to be a future date. The only thing I would note is that the board does have an election in November, and if there is a change in membership, you may want to reconsider the effective date for next year.
Oh, please don't add
that. Madam Chair, we did intentionally, Rashida and I tried to separate the whole discussion we knew we'd have about committees from the other changes in the bylaws, and I guess you'll have to decide whether any of those are appropriate more soon than next year. But obviously, I think Supervisor Cavalier has suggested the committee changes, should be considered for some other time. So,
yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
And Rashida was going to go over the other bylaw changes. I don't want to move you from giving some direction on committees, but
okay.
There may be some things in the bylaws that are changing that the whole board would think would be good to do now because they have to do with what gets on consent and those kind of things. But
okay.
Thank you. At the last board meeting, there were several topics presented, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into all of them. But on the slide before you, you see the topics of order of business, new business, unfinished business, add-on items, closed meeting, and work sessions. And all of these items, I did not receive any feedback on, so I was trying to get a consensus from the board if the board would like to move forward with changes in these categories. I would note the only thing not on here is consent, because I will cover that in a second, because there was a change to that provision.
Ms. Mauer?
It looks like you incorporated everything that we had discussed, and so I am good with the changes as proposed.
All right. Any comments, questions? Okay.
Okay.
Very clear and concise. Okay.
Really quickly, I received some, one of the changes that we made on these board bylaws.
Oh. No, he was clearing his throat.
Oh, okay. One of the changes that we made in the board bylaws was regarding the Board of Zoning Appeals. Evidently, the Board of Zoning Appeals was established through, believe it or not, it was given to me, a General Assembly, what do they call that? Ordinance, law, passed by the General Assembly in 1964. And in there, they have that they get to choose their chairman every year. I had 2 members of the BZA come to me and ask, because it's specific to Stafford County, if we would consider asking the General Assembly to amend that particular, I don't even know, articles of creation. I'm not exactly sure what it is. You don't have it with you, Ms. Rashida? Okay. To include that no chairman serves more than 2 years to correspond with this. This came up at our legislative committee meeting. I just want to throw it out there while we're also talking about the Board of Zoning Appeals and the change to our bylaws in relation to that.
And what page are you on?
It's page 1 is where we talk about. Page 1 is where we talk about the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
Because that is a court-appointed committee through recommendations. However, the committee structure was established by the General Assembly through Stafford County. And so it was a request that I had received by 2 members of the BZA in order to complement what we do in our bylaws.
Okay, Ms. Shelton.
I was just going to say in 1964.
In 1964.
Okay. Anything else?
Madam Chairman, I believe if the board would like to consider that it's appropriate for the legislative committee, our office can look into the actual General Assembly provision because it's not common with state localities, so we can look into that. But more than likely, if the board chooses to go forward, it would be part of its legislative agenda. I have one more slide, Madam Chairman. Thank you. The only other thing that came up at the previous meeting was the consent agenda. Before you, there's the current bylaws consent provisions. They are not defined, but it gives a few specific instances, and then in practice, we've added some other items to that. In the draft version of the agenda at the last meeting, consent was defined as routine in nature and non-controversial. After some continued discussions, we further elaborated on this matter and added that non-routine and non-controversial basically means if something is readily initiating a discussion amongst the board or a board member disagrees, and if there's any doubt, it should be placed on new business. So adding that will hopefully add some clarity to what is consent agenda appropriate.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, any questions? Okay, I think that concludes that conversation. It's very good. Do you have the direction you need?
I believe so. I think there were a couple issues that were a little bit unresolved, but I think we can put the bylaws together in such a way that you can make a final call on it when it comes before you at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you for your efforts on this. Okay, we are now, next the board is going to consider reviewing amendments to the county's cemetery ordinance to the Planning Commission. This is item number 12. Mr. Harvey. Yes?
Before this item begins, I'd like to make a disclosure. On the advice of counsel, I have not previously made this disclosure, but since the AMAA is specifically named in this resolution, I can go no further without it. On May 3rd of 2017, the AMAA requested to meet with me, and then former Chairman Paul Milday offered to join me, stating, and I quote, that Rafi has been a supporter of his and Corey Stewart's over the years. On May 10th, I met with the AMAA to discuss the cemetery ordinance, and immediately after introductions, they proceeded to tell me, and I quote, we love Chairman Milday, and we collect donations for Chairman Milday and host events for him. And Chairman Milday got Stafford County to buy our land. They then offered to raise money for me and host events also. This went on for about 10 minutes, and then they asked me to help them change the new cemetery ordinance. I became quite uncomfortable and limited my questions to how the new ordinance affects them. They could not provide me an answer, to which I indicated that I would need that information before considering making a change. I reiterated my position on an equal standard for the protection of county and private wells, to which they acknowledged risk of contamination and provided me their polyvault literature. While there wasn't a direct offer of money for help, the inference was concerning enough that I reported the meeting to the county administrator and the county attorney's office. I also confirmed that donations were made to Mr. Milday by members of the AMAA, and one of the gentlemen that I met with posted on his Facebook page a picture of him attending Paul's fundraiser 9 days later. I personally have not had any further direct communication with the AMAA, and I believe that regardless of the offering of money and support, I am confident that I can deliberate on this issue fairly and objectively. That concludes my disclosure, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. We are now going to discuss, this is item 12, Planning and Zoning. Consider referring amendment to the county's cemetery ordinance to the Planning Commission, proposed resolution R18-228. And we have option 2 and option 3. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just as background, in December of 2016, the county amended its code, specifically our zoning ordinance, dealing with the establishment of cemeteries. As a general rule, we don't see many cemeteries established over time, so it's sort of an infrequent thing. The issue came up in 2016 as we were looking at the potential to change our code. We saw that our current code at that time did not comply with state law. Specifically, we had a Chapter 8 of our code, which was separate from the zoning ordinance, and state law says that we have to regulate cemeteries through our zoning ordinance. We also had some other provisions that dealt with perpetual care and endowment cemeteries, which we are not permitted to regulate as a local governing body. So that was some of the background of the ordinance amendment. There was also a lot of discussion at the time and development of the ordinance as to what the effects of cemeteries would be on the surrounding community. The two most prevalent effects of cemeteries are traffic during specific events when there's a large gathering of people for a funeral, and then also the potential for groundwater contamination. Through the development of the ordinance and also work with the Planning Commission, they evaluated a number of studies which looked at the international scope and level what the impact of groundwater is for relatively large cemeteries in Europe and also in Africa. They also found literature in various locations in America that references cemeteries as being a potential source of groundwater pollution. However, it was not specifically called out as what those measures are to resolve it. The recommendations from the World Health Organization and some of the international studies recommended that there be setbacks from cemeteries to domestic drinking water wells. And those setback areas range from approximately 850 feet to 1,100 feet. They were all done in metric since they're non-American. Since the board adopted the ordinance in December of 2016, the All Muslim Association of America came and spoke to the board and explained about their concerns with the ordinance and how it affected property they purchased at 1508 Garrisonville Road. Apparently, they had purchased the property in advance of the ordinance, but were not aware of its provisions and believed that the ordinance amendment that was adopted could have an impact on their ability to develop their property for their intended purpose. So in October of 2017, the board referred the matter to the Planning Commission and asked the Planning Commission to come up with recommended changes and forward that back to the board. The Planning Commission established a cemetery committee, and they comprised of 3 meetings where they went back over the literature. They received testimony from some residents in the county about their concerns about groundwater contamination from cemeteries, and also heard feedback from the AMAA regarding their burial practices at the existing cemetery off of Brook Road, and specifically about the use of polyvaults and how they look at that as an optimal practice for burials here in Stafford County. So the board received recommendation from the Planning Commission back in May. The commission suggested that the ordinance not be changed. They had significant concerns about the groundwater implications of locating a cemetery in the county and its potential effects on well water, as well as the our surface drinking water reservoirs, because of the potential issues with leachate from the groundwater sources that could flow into our perennial streams into our reservoirs. So the board has asked staff to come back with some potential options for the Planning Commission to consider with regard to changes to our code. And just as background, the state code does have some provisions which, being a Dillon rule state, we cannot vary from. And one of those provisions is that we have to adopt or allow the location of cemeteries pursuant to our zoning ordinance. It also stipulates that to establish a cemetery, you have to have permission from any residents within 250 yards of that cemetery. However, if that cemetery is separated by a public street, then that distance requirement goes down to 250 feet. Again, that requires the residents within that distance to agree to the location of that cemetery. That's above and beyond what the county can control. Also, the code does require a 300-yard or 900-foot setback from any cemetery being established in proximity to a county drinking water well. In other words, if the county government had a well that we were using for our public water supply. Currently, the county does not have such a well. We use surface water reservoirs. And the state code further says that family cemeteries and also cemeteries associated with churchyards do not have to go through a separate approval process with the county. They're considered to be by right uses. I will clarify a point in our staff report. Our staff report erroneously says that a 900-foot setback off of a reservoir and a 900-foot setback off of a perennial stream draining to a reservoir is a state code requirement. That is incorrect. That's a county code requirement. In addition to that, our county code requires a 900-foot setback from a future cemetery to a private well that serves as a drinking water supply. We also have a minimum size acreage requirement for a cemetery of 25 acres. And we elaborate in our ordinance that all cemeteries have to go through a site plan process. Currently, our regulations may not require a site plan if it's a small family cemetery or a small churchyard cemetery, because our site plan requirement generally applies to land disturbance or structures in excess of 2,500 square feet. 2,500 square feet is roughly 25 by 100. You could potentially have up to 50 burials or more in that small area. So we are a little bit more restrictive in that regards. And then also our current code requires that a cemetery be established through a public hearing process similar to a rezoning. The difference between this and a rezoning in that the board can establish conditions of the approval that regulate the operation and extent of the cemetery. So the staff has provided 3 options for the board to consider. Polar opposite ends of the options, you have one option is to do nothing, leave the ordinance alone. The option 3 is to consider allowing cemeteries by right and follow just the state code requirements and nothing more, nothing less. And then option 2 is somewhere in the middle, where cemeteries could be permitted by right, but the board could require a conditional use permit as a means to provide relief from the 900-foot setback requirements from the county regulations, specifically private wells, reservoirs, and perennial streams draining to reservoirs. And part of the logic behind that is when you look at the 900-foot setback requirement being in the zoning ordinance, relief from that goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And there is a potential where we could be putting the Board of Zoning Appeals in the position of making a land use decision if that parcel is configured in a way where you have the 900-foot setback overlapping between a reservoir and a private well or multiple private wells. And staff's options in our report are a means to spur on discussion. They're not exclusive, so the board doesn't have an either or. You can recommend one of them or make a modification to any of those options available. I'll be happy to answer further questions.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Harvey? Mrs. Maurer?
All right, Mr. Harvey. I'm passionate about this topic, and I have about 15 pages. And the reason for that is there has been a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of, more importantly, misinformation, and there's been a lot of charges of discrimination. And so I want to very slowly and very carefully walk through this ordinance and how it came to be. So some of the answers you've already provided in your background report, but I'm going to ask you to say it again. And I really do appreciate all the work you've done on this. This has been 2 long years. So let me begin with why we are revisiting, yet again, reconsideration of this ordinance. When the cemetery ordinance changes first came before the board in December of 2016, it was passed 7-0 by the board after considerable evidence supporting the change was presented.
Yes, ma'am.
It passed 7-0.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It also passed the Planning Commission 7-0.
Yes.
And Mr. Milday was the one to make the motion to adopt the changes with Ms. Sellers as the second.
I believe that's correct.
I've got it right here. In September of 2017, at the request of Mr. Milday, we voted to have the cemetery ordinance sent back to the Planning Commission for the review of the concerns of the AMAA, even though he made the original motion, for approval, and subsequently in a 7-on-7 meeting with the Planning Commission, stated that the creation of the ordinance was the gold standard in how future ordinances should be considered. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did the Planning Commission on first adoption of the ordinance establish a subcommittee for review of the changes?
Yes, they did.
Was the public allowed to participate in the subcommittee meetings?
Yes.
Were there advertised public hearings on the original changes?
Yes.
And were the concerns of well water contamination presented during those public hearings?
Yes.
Did the AMAA participate in the first review by the Planning Commission?
I don't recall their participation.
Okay. When the Planning Commission was asked to re-review the ordinance, did they allow the public to participate again?
Yes.
How many meetings was the public allowed to participate in prior to returning the report back to the Board of Supervisors?
If I recall correctly, there was 4, 3 committee meetings and 1 public hearing.
Okay. And how many studies were provided supporting the approximate 900-foot or more setback? And I say approximately 900 feet because of the metric, the 250 meters as you had indicated, which equates to, and I looked it up on Google, 820 feet. Do you know how many studies were provided?
I don't recall specifically. I think the number is around 11.
Okay. And I'm gonna, for dramatic purposes, does that look like pretty much what you provided to the Board of Supervisors when you sent it back to us?
It looks like that could be the extent of the studies.
All right. And did any additional evidence get presented to the Planning Commission supporting the 900 feet from private wells when the Planning Commission reconsidered this?
They did a literature review. I don't recall as if there was any other specific reports that jumped out that were new.
Was the UK law presented and the study behind the UK law? Because the UK law was passed in 2017.
I do kind of remember the United Kingdom law in the fact that they had different criteria in which they were analyzed under. There was like 3 phases.
Mm-hmm.
I may not have it correct, but I do recall that.
Okay.
Yes.
And now this is going to be a recall question. Didn't the AMAA concede to potential well water contamination and offer to pay the county money for future contamination issues? This was in a subcommittee meeting.
Ms. Maurer, I don't recall that specifically.
Okay. They also stated that they currently use polyvaults on their Brook Road Cemetery to avoid contamination issues. But can the county require their use?
No, ma'am. It's my understanding federal law prohibits us as a locality from regulating how burials occur, regardless of someone's religious background. Now, from a practical standpoint, individual cemetery operators may have their own preferences for how they do interments, which was one of the interesting things we found through the discussion with the Plan Commission Committee. Oftentimes, cemetery operators will require the concrete vaults because if they do not, then you have a situation where the land subsides into the burial site.
Nice. So they can stop using their contamination prevention method if they choose to do so.
Yes, the county has no regulation on how they anyone buries their dead.
Okay. And so if the AMAA, again, acknowledges this risk of contamination and uses these procedures to minimize that risk, and this is more important, do we have any authority for other cemeteries? How much embalming fluid they use, arsenic in the caskets? Do we have any control over that?
No, ma'am. The county does not have any local land use control over those matters.
Okay. The AMAA presented an email from the health department stating that the health department regulates a 100-foot distance between wells and cemeteries. But when I actually read the regulation, it indicates that there should be a 100-foot setback distance between new wells and existing cemeteries. Here's the email.
Yes.
Okay. And a clean water test must also be provided where there is, my question is, where is the corresponding regulation about establishing cemeteries next to existing wells? Does the health department have that regulation?
Ms. Maurer, not that I'm aware of. When I look at The state code, it speaks to the zoning provisions for localities, and there's also some general provisions regarding cemeteries as a operational entity.
Okay. And how often does the county and/or health department test the water after installation of this well that we are putting 100 feet from a cemetery?
Ms. Maurer, the county does not test water quality for wells.
Okay.
The health department does that typically at the time that someone's wanting to achieve an occupancy permit for their dwelling. I'm not sure that they have any other requirements for post-construction inspections.
Has the county completed any studies showing that there is no health risk of cemeteries? Have we done any ground studies, land studies?
No, ma'am. The extent of the studies was doing a literature review.
Okay, so we're revisiting this yet again, even though we have been provided all this evidence over here to support the ordinance as it's written and no evidence to oppose it. We've got the email from the health department, but that's it.
Ms. Maurer, we don't have any additional evidence to refute the studies that we have here that were done internationally.
Okay.
We don't have anything at the local level.
So why are we revisiting this?
Ms. Maurer, that was some discussion at the board that maybe we should consider revisiting this and sending it down to the Planning Commission. So part of the purpose is for us to have a discussion today about whether that should be done or not.
Okay, and has the health department done any studies to support their assertion that placing wells next to cemeteries is safe?
Ms. Maurer, I'm not aware of any specific studies that the health department's conducted.
Okay, and have we had any complaints about the health department not using current federal health laws or practices in the execution of their duties?
Ms. Maurer, I'm not aware of any complaints.
Okay, so for example, I received a complaint from a constituent who was trying to open a restaurant, and the health department was requiring a sanitation method that was not consistent with federal law. She had to find the chemicals through Craigslist because they were no longer commercially sold. So I've been struggling with the backwards logic, and the health department was really clear in this email that it's all safe, we're all good. And that says 100 feet for new wells next to existing cemeteries is the same thing as establishing a new cemetery within 100 feet of an existing well. The reason for this difficulty is that I can understand that cemeteries have different life cycles. And even the studies that we've talked about, that the risk of contamination dissipates after 10 years. So once you're done with a cemetery after 10 years, it's all been processed in the risk of contamination. So if you're thinking about a 200-year-old Civil War cemetery, having that 100-foot setback makes sense to me. However, I then realized that the health department mission is to ensure that the health of a well at the time of permit only. As you had just mentioned, they do that one test at the time of occupancy, correct?
Yes.
And they do not regulate what goes into the ground and other potential contaminants. That is actually the Department of Environmental Quality, and from what you also mentioned, to a degree, this board, correct?
Madam Chairman and Ms. Maurer, I'm not aware of this board being involved in matters that deal with potential groundwater pollution.
Okay.
Specifically.
But you talked about how we would manage like land use and that somehow helps regulate it. Maybe I misheard you.
Yes, the board does regulate land use, and some of those uses could have a potential effect for groundwater contamination. So some of those things have to be looked at in context of sometimes a conditional use permit, for instance, as a gas station. Do you have gas stations close to people's wells? There are federal regulations about how the gas stations must provide capture and like a two-walled process for containing the fuel within the tanks. But that could be one of the considerations of the board when it looks at the location of where gas stations are being proposed.
Okay. So the Planning Commission, as part of the documentation that I received from them, provided a 2009 DEQ regulation, which regulates the burying of animal carcasses. Now, I recognize that this isn't specific to humans, but the UK, in the UK law, which was passed in 2017, they make no differentiation between the two. Their law actually says same regulations for human remains and animal remains. And they also adopted the World Health Organization recommendation of 820 feet setback for their entire country. So there is a reason that the DEQ regulations are applicable in this discussion, and I want to ask about a few potential inconsistencies and how it relates to the Health Department's assessment. So first, in 2009, the DEQ provided regulations in the burying of animal remains, which is right here. It limits their burial to no more than 2,000 pounds of dead animals on any given acre. Furthermore, it specifically requires a 200-foot setback from any well or spring that is currently being used as a drinking water supply. If you assume the industry standard of 1,000 bodies per acre, as provided in an email that I received from a former member of the cemetery board, that could amount to approximately 150 to 200,000 pounds of human remains. How does the health department explain that it's not okay to bury more than 2,000 pounds of animal remains within 200 feet of a well, but it is okay to bury 150,000 to 200,000 pounds of human remains within 100 feet?
Ms. Maurer, I can't speak for the health department. I don't know if they've researched that or made the logical connection.
Okay, I appreciate that. So in addition to the more than 75 times the limits of the DEQ standard, these human remains also contain embalming fluids, toxins from medical devices, and arsenic in the caskets, all outlined as hazardous contaminants by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Once again, I ask you, do we have any scientific evidence that supports the health department's assertion, or are we just relying on this "it's all good" email?
Well, Ms. Maurer, from a practical standpoint, the county relies on the state health department for all well regulations. They are the agency that permits the wells and sets the standards for water quality for consumption.
Okay, so what about burying of animal carcasses? Do we comply with the DEQ regulations and their 200-foot setback?
The property owner would have to comply with that if there was an issue, someone drilling a new well where there was a recent burial and the health department knew about, then they would also apply that setback.
Okay. So there have been several claims of discrimination of Stafford County by the AMAA. So I want to talk about the AMAA's long history with Stafford. Their first cemetery went in, I believe, in 1992. And they have made these claims of discrimination both to the Freelance Star and the Department of Justice over this ordinance. According to documentation, they purchased a property on Brook Road in 1992. Was the previous ordinance in effect at that time?
Yes, the cemetery ordinance that was revised in 2016 had a date from 1979.
Okay, so the 25 acres was the minimum requirement, but I only see that their property upon purchase was 8. How was it approved if it didn't meet the minimum size requirement?
Well, Ms. Maurer, when I went back and looked at the site plan and the waiver, there was a waiver granted by the Board of Supervisors for allowing them to not have a paved travel lane and parking area.
But when was that waiver placed?
That was in 1995, and that waiver stipulated that it was for a private cemetery. And when I've gone back and looked at the code, another one of our problem issues we had in the code at that time, it said for perpetual and endowment cemeteries, it had to be approved by ordinance by the board, and the board could also impose a conditional use permit. At the time of reading the resolution where the waiver was granted, it said it was a private cemetery.
Is that how they're operating as a private cemetery? They sell their lots online?
Ms. Maurer, from my understanding, looking at the website today, they sell cemetery lots, which is not the term of private cemetery. From what we knew of back in the 90s was that there was no exchange of funds. It was strictly allowing someone to bury somebody on your property.
So they claimed it was a private cemetery, but they've been operating it essentially as a public cemetery.
I don't know what the difference was or when the difference occurred from the 1995 approval the board gave to today.
Okay. In March of 2016, the AMAA had listed their other property on the market for sale. It was also listed previously for about 6 months, according to the emails I have. Did they ever inquire as to using that property to expand their cemetery? So they bought another piece of property. It was roughly, what, 40-something acres?
Yes, ma'am.
And they put that piece of property on the market. It is adjacent to the original 8-acre cemetery, correct?
Yes.
Why didn't they just expand the cemetery with the land they already had?
Ms. Maurer, they had filed a grading plan to potentially grade the property in advance of asking for an extension of the cemetery. But my recollection of the discussion at the time was they found it being cost prohibitive to expand the cemetery onto that property because of steep slopes and also a number of wetland crossings.
And in May of 2016, the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust notified the county that the property was for sale, and the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation was willing to provide matching funds for the property. Were you aware that Supervisor Milday was a member of both boards at the time?
No, ma'am.
In October of 2016, the board authorized the acquisition of the land through the use of PDR funds. Did this property get chosen through our normal PDR application process?
No, ma'am. It was that property as well as an adjacent property were acquired through a developer contribution for land conservation purposes. It did not go through the county's purchase of development rights program.
And that developer contribution was part of a conditional use permit voted on in 2015 in Mr. Milday's district, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And there was some sort of, when I look back at those minutes, there was a lot of consternation on the legal issues and whatnot. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. So their property received special consideration outside of our normal processes, so we could purchase a property that they had on the market for a while and could not sell nor choose to use to expand their property. Moving on to an In the Loop article, a dump site was discovered on the property prior to Stafford County obtaining title, and it actually disqualified the land from the Land Conservation Grant Program. Does the county have an ordinance which cites properties when their properties are discovered to have a dump site?
Yes, ma'am.
And if so, did the county cite the AMAA?
No, ma'am, not that I'm aware of. And there was also dumping on the adjacent property, too, so that was an issue that the county had if we were going to participate with the state on acquiring the property. We had to clear it from, clear the debris out of the properties.
So we didn't cite them, we didn't discriminate against them religiously. Actually, they were given special consideration because we didn't apply our Stafford County ordinance.
Ms. Maurer, we had a contract to purchase the property.
Okay.
And the county did not pursue any code violations that I'm aware of.
Did we use taxpayer-funded county resources and money to clean up their property?
Ms. Maurer, I know we used county funds. I'm not sure what funding source it was that we used it for.
It was county funds, though.
Yes.
Okay. And isn't it the policy of Stafford to not do work on private property due to the risk and liability?
Ms. Maurer, that's our typical practice.
Okay. So I can't seem to find in the purchase agreement originally authorized by the board the county's responsibility to clean up any dump sites potentially discovered. So you mentioned that we had a contract to purchase the property, but was there anything in that contract to purchase the property that stipulated we were responsible to clean it up should any dump sites be found?
Ms. Maurer, I'm not familiar with the terms of the contract. I'd have to go and read the purchase agreement to see what it said at the time.
Okay. I can assure you the answer to that is no. Did the change in the contract terms then, and you probably don't know the answer to this question, come before the board in open session?
Again, Ms. Maurer, I don't know those facts.
Was Paul Milday chairman at the time that this deal was done to clean up their site?
I believe he was.
And was Mr. Milday also chairman of the yard board when the landfill staff and resources was used to clean up the property of his donors?
Ms. Maurer, I don't recall if he was or not, but that could easily be determined by looking at the county records.
Okay. So how is it that we charge Stafford County residents a fee to use the dump due to the financial difficulties of the R Board? Yet our former chairman diverts funds for this cleanup effort for his donors' property. And I know that's a rhetorical question. You don't want to answer that, do you?
Ms. Maurer, I wasn't involved in the details on how those decisions were made.
Okay. So they once again were not held to the same standards as our other Stafford County citizens and continue to be provided special access to resources unavailable to the rest of our voters. Do you think, to use one of the constituents' arguments, a blind eye has been turned in the application of Stafford County and potentially Virginia law?
Can you repeat that again?
And so my point is, and I guess this is an unfair question for you, so I will withdraw the question. It's unfair for you. But in this timeline that I'm kind of pointing out, they didn't meet the requirements of the original ordinance. We bought this property outside of Stafford County typical process. We clean up the property, even though that's not normally our process. I'm kind of concerned about an establishment of a pattern, but I'm going to move on because those are unfair questions for you. So I want to ask a few questions about their property on Garrisonville Road, because I'm concerned about the incorrect assertion made through the press and to the Department of Justice that absent this ordinance, they had a right to build a cemetery on the property with no further approvals required. According to our previous ordinance, did they have to get Board of Supervisor approval prior to constructing the cemetery?
Yes, ma'am.
Was that approval secured prior to the purchase, as is the normal process typically that we see for other land buyers who want to use a piece of property for a purpose which requires approval?
No application was made to the board.
Okay. There are 2 homes within 250 feet of the proposed cemetery. According to state law, their approval is required before the cemetery can be constructed. Have those approvals been secured and submitted to the county?
Ms. Maurer, I'm not aware of those approvals being submitted to the county. That would be something we would ask the applicant to provide prior to us sending the information forward to the board to consider establishing the cemetery.
So even before this ordinance change had been made, which were carried into the new ordinance, they did not meet the necessary requirements to construct their cemetery.
From what testimony we've heard from people that came earlier today, that would be the case.
Okay. So while the new ordinance may have added a regulatory layer, they did not and arguably could not meet the previous requirements as outlined in the original Stafford County Code, and more importantly, state law. Am I understanding this correctly?
From what I know of today, from testimony we heard from the residents, that the proposed property would be closer than 250 feet of their residence, and without their consent could not move forward based on state law.
Okay. So why are we twisting ourselves into a pretzel to change an ordinance if they can't currently meet the provisions of state law?
Madam Chair, that's, of course, a question for the board.
Okay.
It's before the board, not before staff.
Okay, I appreciate that. So now I have a couple of questions on the options as they are presented. Option 1 is to keep the ordinance as is, correct?
Yes.
And options 2 and 3, the main purpose of option 3 is to remove the 900-foot setback from private wells.
Yes.
And the purpose of option 2 is to provide an opportunity for a conditional use permit to go less than 900 feet.
Yes.
Okay. Are we requiring scientific evidence on option 2? Are we requiring scientific evidence for that? We talk about they can get a conditional use permit if they provide evidence. Are we talking about scientific evidence? How do we qualify that?
Well, Ms. Maurer, for option 2 with the conditional use permit, the board can ask for additional studies to justify whether they should approve the permit.
Okay.
And those studies would likely be hydrogeologic studies. We require similar studies, but for a different purpose for golf courses that are proposing using private wells as a water source. And that, in the cases of golf courses, the concern is that they're going to draw down existing wells from surrounding neighbors. In this case, we look at the geology of the property in relation to nearby wells and or the public drinking water supply to look at what's the probability of contamination. If you had soils that were highly permeable, that could be a high opportunity for contamination. Other types of clay soils may not have much of a prospect for contamination.
Okay. But we're keeping the 900-foot setback for public wells.
Yes, that's state law. Again,
Okay.
the locality can't adjust that.
Okay. Do we treat public water?
Ma'am, we do treat the water in our reservoirs, yes.
Okay, and do we test public water?
Yes.
And how do we treat water for private wells? Do we?
No, ma'am.
And how often do we test water for private wells?
Stafford County does not.
Okay. How do we ensure that private wells are safe?
Ms. Maurer, I'm not aware of the county being involved in that question.
But we ensure that public water is safe through testing and treating.
Yes.
Okay, so what it sounds like is that residents with private wells are more vulnerable to contamination, but our ordinance is only going to protect the public water to a higher standard, but not provide equal protection for a more vulnerable population. We're setting up two standards with option 2 and option 3. From wells.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Foley, you look like you have something.
Yeah, I'm not, the nature of the question, I'm not sure.
I'm getting
Jeff's in
to
a
a point,
position
and
to-
I want to walk people through the thought process on this, because this has become so contentious, and there's been so much misinformation on this issue in the paper that it's incredibly important to walk the public through the reasoning for the establishment of the original ordinance, and quite frankly, my support for keeping, or for supporting option 1.
And Madam Chair, my only comment was related to our role in providing public water versus a role in the quality of private wells.
Right.
Which is not something that the county does, although the health department's involved in that. So just didn't want it to appear that we had an equal role in both of those.
And I will agree that we don't have an equal role. Absolutely correct. My argument, however, would be if we're not going to, we should have an equal role in the protection of the wells. And that's what I'm trying to ascertain. When I talk about equal protection, in option 2 and option 3, they're not providing equal protection for the private wells as we would for a public well. And that was the basis of the question. So these are going to be interesting questions. You ready for it?
Sure.
What are the racial and socioeconomic profiles of these people that we are setting up a different standard for through option 2 and option 3?
Ms. Maurer, these options are land use options. They're not people options.
But the rural residents are people
yes.
who reside on land, who get water from public wells. Do we know the racial or socioeconomic profiles of the people in our rural communities?
No, ma'am. We could try to disaggregate census data to see what it shows from 2010, but we have no knowledge.
And the reason I ask that question, and if this board decides to move forward, is that I find option 2 and option 3, because we're not going to protect these equally, to be discriminatory, because they do not have the equal protection that we would have for the wells, for public water. And so if we're going to, in my mind, set up in discriminatory practice, it would be important to know what those profiles are. So if this board chooses to move forward, I think it's important to have that information.
I think it would be fair to say that these options were not developed with any of that information in mind.
That's correct.
I am more than certain that these options weren't developed with those issues in mind, but I'm looking at these options as being discriminatory against the rural population. And so we need to ensure, if we're going to tell people that we're going to be discriminatory, I want to know who it is. And I think that's an important point. Especially since discrimination is becoming like the heart of this issue altogether. And so we need to look at all potential discrimination that could be applied should we go forward with option 2 or option 3. Also in option 2 and option 3, we're removing all other non-state restrictions, including the Board of Supervisor approval process and the minimum acreage requirement. Is that correct? The way I read the resolution, by right, except for state standards.
Yes.
Okay. So a cemetery can be next to any school, in a business district, if it's on an A1 parcel of land.
Correct.
Are you aware that we have A1 parcels of land in the middle of our new downtown Stafford?
Yes.
Okay, and we can put a cemetery in the middle of our new downtown Stafford by right, if we choose option 2 or option 3.
Well, option two had a conditional use permit if it was within a reservoir or a public drinking water well.
Right, but,
or a private well.
Private well, not public wells. So are
Yes.
there private wells inside the USA, a ton of them?
Not a ton. There could be that situation, and that may be where the board would want to take a look at that standard to talk about not applying the 900 feet inside the urban services area, because the logic is we're going to extend public water to all the properties in the urban services area.
So from a transportation perspective, and you brought this up, by removing that Board of Supervisor approval, and you said transportation impacts can be intense because of funerals, we can't require any transportation mitigation.
Correct.
All right. And don't all of our comparative jurisdictions require some sort of board approval process, or at least most of them?
For the most part, yes. It's either a special permit or special use permit, which comes to the Board of Supervisors.
And if we remove the Board of Supervisor approval process, how do we protect ourselves from being sued by the surrounding landowners?
Well, Ms. Maurer, at
So
any
let me-
point in time, the board can be sued by anybody.
So according to state law, Section 3, there's an action for damages clause that allows the surrounding landowners to sue the municipality if they incur damage by the establishment of a cemetery. This could be water contamination or loss of real estate value.
Madam Chairman, Supervisor Meyer, just a point of clarification on that. That code provides a cause of action for actually the owner of the cemetery.
Okay.
So if it's a municipal cemetery, so here this would not be a municipal cemetery, and that wouldn't be applied towards the county.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm going to end this painful unless anybody else has any other questions, process, and make a motion, Madam Chair, for option 1, which doesn't change the ordinance and keeps it as it stands.
I'd like to make a substitute motion. I'd like to make a motion for deferral. I want to defer this because it seems like there's a lot of information that's coming up now that perhaps we need to think about and discuss.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for a deferral.
Madam Chair,
Discussion.
Mr. Snellings, who is away on a family emergency, did speak to me personally today and ask that we defer this issue because he couldn't be here today. And he's one of 4 remaining board members who was here at the time when we took the vote on this. So I think he has the right to be here to vote.
Okay. Any other discussion by other board members? Ms. Maurer?
Madam Chair, this issue is 2 years, 2 long, long years. And although it's unfortunate that Mr. Snellings could not be here, and I understand how important this issue is, especially considering some of the negotiations that was revealed within public comment, we need to give these residents an answer. They're tired. And you know, there's a whole lot going on with this, and I would ask that we give them an answer and not defer this issue.
Would you like?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yeah, I would prefer we don't defer it either. This has been going on for a while. In the sake of transparency, I was serving on the Planning Commission and actually on the subcommittee that drafted this ordinance. And so I have gone through all this material. Quite honestly, staff has sent us a great number of emails and other material for us to peruse, to look at it. So to me, I think we were able to make a decision and move on with this. I do believe that this comes down to 2 basic issues. One is quality of life, and the other one is fairness. And I think if you look at the quality of life aspect, quite honestly, the whole purpose of doing any of these revisions is that most of our ordinances and many of our zoning categories and many things in the Commonwealth of Virginia are not up to the 21st century, and that is why we looked into this, was to try to make it up to the 21st century. And so that was why we were going forward with this. It's interesting that some people have expressed the attitude that this is going beyond what the state allows us to do. Quite honestly, we do many things beyond what the state bare minimum is. The state says X, we go beyond that. I think, quite honestly, that our road situation, the Commonwealth of Virginia has claimed it will take care of our road system, and yet people continually on this board and other boards, local boards and commissions want us to deal with roads. Why? Quality of life, quality of public health, public safety. Child services, we had a briefing today. Why do we go farther than the Commonwealth tells us? Public health, public safety, quality of life. In fact, we were at a VACO meeting, and Fairfax and Prince William praised us for what we're doing in child safety because we're going beyond what the state tells us to do. Stormwater. 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion.
Point of order, Madam Chairman. This does not relate.
Well, it relates to the fact that we do not need to defer. We need to actually move upon it. So rather than belabor it for Mr. Cavalier, I also think that this is an issue of fairness. These people deserve to have this dealt with. So were this not this motion to defer to fail, then I will continue to talk.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we have a motion on the floor to defer this item to another agenda. Please cast your vote. Okay.
Madam Chairman, according to the board's bylaws, a tied vote is a failed vote, and it should be brought back to the board at the next meeting.
Okay, so the board can take this item up at the next meeting.
Except,
Actually,
Madam
I
Chair, we have
apologize. I
a
forgot
motion
there was
on
a
the
motion
floor, and that's
Yeah.
a motion for option one.
Yes, that's
Correct.
correct. I apologize, Supervisor Maurer.
Okay, so now we have a motion on the floor for option one.
All
Any
right.
discussion?
Well, normally the motion maker
Well,
gets.
is there a motion and is there a second? There is. Okay, thank you.
So, Madam Chair, as the maker of this motion, I'm passionate on this issue on a number of levels. I have a lot to say. I have a lot to say in support of my motion, and fortunately, the bylaws, as we've been discussing, do not restrict my time. Let's be honest. Politically, this whole situation reeks, and I almost feel like this board has been set up. The AMAA had 75 acres adjacent to their existing cemetery, which they could have easily used to expand their cemetery. I'm told by planning staff that it was determined that the land development costs, and as we've heard today, would be too expensive for the AMAA to use that 75 acres for their cemetery. I'm not sure when this assessment was done. It appears maybe 2015. But I can tell you that according to emails in 2014, former Supervisor Milday began using county staff to assist the AMAA, his big supporters, in searching for a new site. Sometime later, they put their land on the market, and in 2016, county staff was contacted about surprise grant money coming from a conservation foundation that Mr. Milday happened to serve on through an appointment by the General Assembly. The matching funds came from a PDR gift secured through a 2015 board-approved conditional use permit in Mr. Milday's district, which is a whole nother issue. In 2016, the AMAA land, along with another parcel, was approved by this board outside of the normal PDR process for purchase with the earmarked PDR and grant funds. In 2017, it was discovered that the AMAA land was not eligible for grant funding due to the dump site on their property. So instead of issuing a citation to the AMAA, as is normal under our code, Stafford County taxpayer-funded resources from primarily the landfill and other departments were used to clean up the site. Mr. Milday at the time was both chair of the Board of Supervisors and the R Board, which oversees the landfill. I believe the land closed sometime in 2017. Simultaneously, in 2016, I was contacted by a citizen who lives across the street from what was rumored to be a new cemetery site, and they were worried about their well, which was 50 feet from the property. It was discovered that the state required a 900-foot setback from public wells, which was similar to the standard recommended by the World Health Organization. So I wanted equal protection for private wells, a more vulnerable source of water. Easy, right? So easy, actually, that after several committee meetings by the Planning Commission and public hearing by the Board of Supervisors, it was approved 7-0 by both boards, with Mr. Milday making the motion and later calling the process the gold standard of ordinance creation. And then Mr. Milday finds out that his big supporters were negatively affected and begins the process to overturn his gold standard ordinance. Now, after months of accusations of religious discrimination, misstatements of facts in the Freelance Star, and a Department of Justice investigation, we are here today, trying to change an ordinance at the request of an organization who hasn't even met the state requirements for its establishment. Putting all that aside, we have before us 3 options provided by staff for us to consider. Options 2 and 3 are incredibly flawed for a number of reasons, and I almost feel like they were rushed in their creation due to the pressure of a DOJ investigation. First, both ordinances incorrectly lay out the parameters of the state law, which alone should send them back to the drawing board. Secondly, they remove the Board of Supervisor approval process, which almost every one of our comparative counties has in order to ensure protection of our overall community and, quite frankly, ourselves. The unintentional consequences of this ordinance could put a cemetery without further input by the board next to schools, which the DEQ doesn't allow for animals, in business parks like around the airport, and even in the middle of our newly envisioned downtown Stafford. Heck, if a neighborhood doesn't have an HOA, a cemetery could plop down in the middle of it in our rural areas by right with no word by the board. And without Board of Supervisor approval, we can't ensure that transportation impacts are mitigated due to the large traffic volume from funerals, leaving the Garrisonville Road property, which has one of the highest crash rates in the county, even more vulnerable. But let's talk about the science. We have this entire stack of studies that justify the 900-foot setback, citing all sorts of potential sources of contamination. And then we have this email with no scientific evidence to support it from someone in the health department saying, nah, it's all good. And while I appreciate the health department weighing in, I fear they may be outside of their swim lane. It is true they have regulations for siting of wells near cemeteries because they are concerned about the quality of water when it leaves the tap. Hence, the single test required after installation. But ensuring the quality and quantity of water in the ground is the Department of Environmental Quality. Now, I have seen where they weigh in on cemetery. I have not seen where they weigh in on cemeteries directly, and that's probably because the issue, as Mr. Harvey pointed out, only comes up twice in 20 years. But what is more common, especially in the rural areas, where there is an abundance of animals, is the burying of animal remains. And before Clark Lemming, the husband of our chairman of our school board, starts running to the Freelance Star misstating that there's no correlation, the UK, when they established their World Health Organization, recommended an 820-foot setback for their entire country in 2017, specifically named both animal and human remains equally. And the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality regulates that no more than 2,000 pounds of animal remains is allowed to be buried on any 1 acre, and they require a 200-foot setback from any well or spring supplying drinking water. I do not understand how the organization that is actually charged with protecting the quality of our environment and natural resources limits 2,000 pounds of remains on 1 acre, 200 feet from a well, and yet the health department says 200,000 pounds of remains that include EPA-identified contaminants, such as embalming fluid, mercury from medical devices, and arsenic from caskets, is okay. Seriously? Maybe this is why we have so many water contamination issues in the U.S. lately. People in Portland, Oregon, North Carolina, Flint, Michigan probably said, it's all good. And don't forget the poisoning of thousands of men, women, and children at Camp Lejeune from contaminated groundwater. 1 month after a dear friend of mine died from this water poisoning, the federal government finally admitted that his cancer was a direct result of that contamination. And my last point of contention with supporting options 2 or 3, Madam Chair, is that the inherent discrimination of our rural citizens through this ordinance make either option 2 or option 3 unconscionable. County water is treated and tested on an hourly basis. At least that's what I saw when I went to the new plant down in South Stafford. And we as a board are considering through these options to protect that water to a higher standard than our more vulnerable water supply in the rural areas. More importantly, through option 2 and 3, we are telling the public that the protection of water that is supplied to the families of 6 of the 7 members of this board who currently reside inside the urban service area is more important than those we are elected to serve. I was never asking for greater protection of water supplied to my rural constituents, although some of these studies recommend it. I am only asking for equal protection under our ordinance of a life-sustaining resource that my own family enjoys. Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on on option 1, which is to leave everything the same. Are there other comments from board members? Mr. Cavalier.
Well, a couple of years ago when this issue was first brought to us, we were briefed as this board by a junior member of the Planning Commission, which was totally out of normal order. That has rarely, if ever, been done, and I don't think that we were given the briefing that we probably deserved at that time, and I don't think we were afforded the opportunity to make a really informed decision. Today, Mr. Harvey, our planning director, briefed us, which is the way it should be. And I'm not sure which of those options is the best one, but leaving it the same, I don't believe, is the option, so I can't support that one.
All right, thank you. Mr. Cohen?
Well, just to pick up where I was, to me, this was when I was on the Planning Commission, when I was on the subcommittee, and now when I'm here, a question of quality of life and fairness. And I did a lot of the quality of life, but our stormwater discussion 2 weeks ago, we talked about the fact that our staff is doing far more than what the Commonwealth of Virginia tells us to do because of public safety, public health, and quality of life of our citizens. So we go beyond the bare minimum when we need to, when it's in our constituents and our public's need. Which brings us to fairness. I'm in the USA, so I turn on my tap. I don't have to worry about anything, but not too far from my home, there are people on well water. And I really cannot look those people in the eye and say that my situation should be at 900 feet, but your situation should only be at 100 feet. What we're really telling our residents is that the people outside the urban service area, you are deserving of quality lower than third world nations. And I don't think that's equitable. So we looked at, yes, we did not see too many Virginia standards because, amazingly, Commonwealth of Virginia is not looking at updating many things. We've heard that quite often. I forget if it was this part of the ordinance or some other ordinance, but when we were looking at this in the Planning Commission, we were told that it was drafted before Virginia took over the roads. Think about that. This ordinance, or some ordinance that the Commonwealth of Virginia is forcing us to live under, was made almost 100 years ago. Things have changed in 100 years. Technology has changed. And when we went into this, we were thinking of all the things that are in regular undertakers' activities and burials of formaldehyde and et cetera. And so we were looking at it as traditional burials, and so our mindset was that way. Option 2, to me, is an exceedingly insulting response to our citizens. We're going to send a strongly worded letter to the state. We've heard your concerns, and all it's worthy is a letter. I know that we approved a letter to the Commonwealth of Virginia about an on-ramp going southbound on the express lanes, but I also know that Mr. Dudenheffer has worked diligently on trying to get them to understand the logic behind that. If we were to look at all road issues and just say we're not going to look at that at all, we're just going to send strongly worded letters, I think that would be a rather interesting board meeting. Remember, this is an issue for an application that was never submitted. I know I met with Mr. Harvey. I met with our economic development team on proposed ideas to possibly rezone something to B2. And they haven't submitted the application. Does that mean we don't look at updating B2 zoning because somebody theoretically may want to do something? It doesn't make sense. So for the fact that I think that our residents outside the urban service area, those people who are in White Oak and in Hartwood and in Rock Hill and in Griffiths Water, who are not on our public water, they deserve the same type of treatment that our citizens in the USA deserve. And so I believe we should vote for option 1. Thank you.
Any other comments by board members? Okay. All right, seeing none, please cast your vote for option 1. Tally the vote. Mr. Dudenheffer, you are abstaining? That's correct. Okay. So the motion passes with 1 absent and 1 abstention. All right. With that, that concludes our 3 o'clock meeting. The Board of Supervisors will continue at 7 o'clock with 1 public hearing tonight. Thank you. Meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Tonight, I'm going to give the invocation, and Cindy Shelton is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would please stand. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together tonight to do the public's work here in these board chambers. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our role as elected officials. While we only have 1 public hearing tonight, our board works each and every day on items that affect our citizens, and Father, we need your guiding hand in this continued work in Stafford County. Father, we ask you to support the 18 families that lost loved ones in the Hurricane Florence and lift them up during this horrific time when they grieve their family losses. And not just for the loss of their family, but for the loss of their homes and other property. All of these families will need your love and support while they try to rebuild their lives and their homes. We ask our entire community to pray for these families that experience this devastation. In your name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'm going to switch around we have 2 presentations tonight, and for the first presentation, Mr. Cortez is not here yet, but he did indicate he'd be a few minutes late, and we'll move right on to Chris McDonald, and I'm very excited that Chris is here with us tonight. He's the Director of Government Relations for the Virginia Association of Counties, and he is here tonight to present the Virginia Association of Counties, also known as VACO, 2018 Achievement Award to Stafford County for partnering with the community to create a lasting memorial. Chris.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board, as well as members of the public. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I was just up here a couple weeks ago for another VACO meeting, so I'm delighted to be back in this neck of the woods again, this time presenting Stafford County with one of our VACO Achievement Awards. For the benefit of those here tonight who may not be familiar with the Virginia Association of Counties, or VACO, a bit of background. Founded in 1934, VACO was established to serve and support your efforts as county officials in a number of ways. First and foremost is through our advocacy efforts in the state legislature and at the federal level, where we work to promote the interests and legislative priorities of our member counties. In addition to our advocacy efforts, we also serve counties through our numerous education programs, member services, and county-specific technical analysis expertise. 16 years ago, VACO first established our Achievement Awards program to better recognize counties that have developed and adopted innovative approaches to providing public services, as well as to identify programs that could serve as models for other counties to emulate. This year, we had 3 outstanding judges who reviewed and selected winning program submissions. Ted Povar, Associate Director of the Virginia Institute of Government and a former city manager. Dr. Cheryl Bailey, Senior Vice President of Springstead Incorporated and a former Chesterfield County Deputy Administrator. And finally, Larry Land, our recently retired VACO Director of Policy Development. In reviewing submissions, programs are judged according to several key criteria. Does the program offer an innovative solution to a problem, situation, or delivery of services? Does the program promote intergovernmental cooperation or cooperation with local, state, federal, and private entities in addressing a problem or situation? Does the program provide a model that other local governments may learn from or implement in their own localities? Is the program based on programs from another public or private entity who represents an innovative approach or customization by their local government? And then finally, judges use their expertise and instincts when making their final decisions. Over the years, the Achievement Awards program has grown more and more competitive. In 2015, VACO received 93 entries. In 2016, VACO received 91 entries. In 2017, we received 79 entries. This year, we received a staggering 106 entries, which I believe is our highest number ever, and ultimately selected 27 winners from 19 counties. This year, we are pleased to recognize Stafford County for their exemplary work in partnering with the community to create a lasting Armed Services Memorial. At this time, I wanted to turn it over to Supervisor Dudenheffer, if you'd like to explain the program at all, before providing the award itself.
And while Mr. Dudenheffer is coming down, if all of you that were part of the Armed Services Working Committee and the Commission, if you could please come forward. And I would like to say that Mr. Snellings is not able to join us tonight due to a family emergency, but he was also invaluable in his work on this commission.
Well, I want to thank VACO for recognizing us in this award. The design, development, and construction of the Veterans Memorial that we have here is a true act of love, I think, and dedication to the veterans in the Stafford County area. We are extremely proud of the work. It was a community effort, all the way down to the high school art students who helped us design the final design. I'm going to tell you that I hope that every Stafford citizen takes the time to go down and actually look at it. It's breathtaking in the evening for the amount of money and the fundraising and everything that we did. So again, thank you, VACO, for recognizing us. We're really proud of the work that we did, and we hope to support you in the future.
Thank you again. Please join me in congratulating the county for your service.
I certainly want to start by thanking the Stafford County Board of Supervisors who supported us financially, and with folks like Shannon Howell and gave us the help that we needed, and also thank the citizens of Stafford County who through generations have been very, very generous.
Well, I just would like to say, from a veteran, thank you for this memorial. And if you have the opportunity to go up and walk it, I think you'll know what I mean. As you walk through the campaigns, the wars that our nation has fought, and you look and you realize that what the county has done is honored those men and women who gave their all, but most especially those men and women and their families who in fact gave so much and continue to give so much to Stafford County and to the nation.
As a local Marine Corps widow, I really appreciate this opportunity to provide a memorial to the county, not only for our veterans, but for the families as well who, got their service member to come home and those who didn't. So thank you guys so much for this opportunity.
When I received a call to join up with this working group, I had no idea in the world what we might be doing, what it was going to turn out like, what kind of effort we're embarking on. I still today look back at it and can't believe that we really pulled this off the way we did. And it worked out very well. Thank you guys.
If we want to take a photo with that, I can. Absolutely. That'd be great. Thank you. So on behalf of the Virginia Association of Counties, we'd like to congratulate you again as being one of the 19 counties of the 107 applicants for this VACO Achievement Award. It's a tremendous project. We look forward to promoting it to all the rest of our members, and we'll honor Stafford County again at our annual conference. We can't say enough how much we appreciate your hard work and really appreciate this touching memorial that you've developed here in the county. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your work, and thank you for coming tonight. And now I see Daniel Cortez is here. And Mr. Cortez, if you could come forward, and you have the at the podium. And Mr. Cortez will be giving us a very short presentation on National Hispanic Month, which we just passed a proclamation earlier today for this.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm honored today, as a private citizen activist, proud American of Hispanic descent, to stand before you in this august body to provide a short history and emphasize the importance of the action you have taken or are about to take, recognizing Hispanic History Month in Stafford County. Mandated Public Law 100-402 states National Hispanic Heritage Month is indeed the period from September the 15th to October the 15th when the United States recognizes the contributions of Hispanics and Latinos with respect to the group's heritage and culture. Yesterday, I proudly stood before the President of the United States, Donald Trump, at the White House celebration kicking off the National Recognition Program. I was humbled for the honor to perform our national anthem for the President and guests. Along with other national Hispanic leaders, we listened to the President, recognized the contributions of our proud community of hard-working blue-collar laborers and those in our service industries, leaders in business, government, cinema, and even some accomplished writers and broadcasters. President Trump's words, citing the fact that Hispanic unemployment is at the lowest in history as our median household income remains at record highs, were historical statements. And your actions as a board supporting entrepreneurialism and attempting to keep our low tax rate is also to be celebrated during this Hispanic Heritage Month. Celebrating Hispanic heritage, as with Black, Asian, or Native American History Month, remains part of our community effort, regardless of which political party has the majority. Some may wonder why this particular time frame was chosen to honor Hispanic heritage. Well, September the 15th is the designated starting point. It is the anniversary date of 5 Latin American countries, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, who declared their independence in 1821. Mexico, Chile, and Belize have their celebrations September the 16th, 18th, and 21st, respectively. According to historians, the first colonial settlement of North America occurred in 1513 in St. Augustine, Florida, by Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon, 94 years before Jamestown. Today, in Virginia, about 400,000 people are of Hispanic heritage, with ancestral roots from Spain, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Central and South America. Google Virginia is for Lovers, and you will see information provided by the state chronicling how in 1524, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon from Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, sailed up Rio Guandape, which is known today as the James River and Chesapeake Bay. In 1526, he founded the settlement of San Miguel de Guandape, which some scholars believe was near present-day Jamestown. The Spanish even established a Jesuit mission in Virginia's Chesapeake Bay 37 years before the founding of Jamestown. The history of our community in Virginia and Stafford is complex. After the Mexican-American War, followed by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, that extended our national control from territories once held by Spain and later Mexico. It is significant to point out that the vast majority of America's Hispanic population chose to stay and become full U.S. citizens with the privileges of assimilation. That assimilation facilitates our national melting pot of cultures that I feel identifies our consummate Americans. We proud Americans of Hispanic descent acknowledge, like many of you here before us and in the audience, that it is our diverse local and national culture that is our strength. For me, it's my 52% Iberian or Spanish blood and 37% Native American that includes my Aztec Indian blood. And the Aztec Empire did extend into the United States by territory. Our Hispanic culture is not monolithic, but demonstrates the multifaceted cultures of a community, at times in self-conflict. In the ongoing history of American Hispanic community, our Hispanic community, I suggest that the recent legislative action by 1st District Congressman Rob Whitman, who co-sponsored Congresswoman Barbara Comstock's House Bill 3249, signed by President Trump, that provides millions in grant funding aiding neighborhoods fighting gang violence, is of great significance as you share your Hispanic Heritage Proclamation with the private sector community. My compliments, Madam Chairman, with your intentions, and I hope they're still your intentions, to reach out to our faith-based communities with your proclamation. With the large contingent of military families in the region, it should be noted that among enlisted recruits, 43% of men and 56% of women are Hispanic or a racial minority. President Trump said, and I quote, "We are especially grateful for the 1.2 million Hispanic American men and women who have answered the call to serve in our armed forces, demonstrating remarkable loyalty, bravery, and dedication to duty." And as one of 5 generations of Cortez family members called to serve in American armed forces, I am proud to also share the fact that 60 members of the Hispanic community have also been awarded the nation's highest decoration, the Medal of Honor. Defending the American way of life, and in Stafford, it is a relatively safe way of life. Stafford County thanks your supportive efforts and is safe because of the residents here and your actions. As a community, though, we have pride in the fact that the scourge of MS-13 gang violence that brutally murdered my godson, who was at the time at the wrong place at the wrong time, in El Cajon, California, in 2004, these actions are practically non-existent in Stafford County. This board, our Sheriff's Department, and the magnificent prosecutorial presence of our Commonwealth Attorney Eric Olson and his fine staff are the reasons for that fact in Stafford's public safety. That and the President Trump's magnificent achievement to prevent horrific crimes caused in our community by illegals who bring shame to the majority of Latinos who seek a better way of life and follow the legal process. Yes, in our pride of achievements, we have community shame as we seek common ground to resolve the unresolved immigration crisis. It should be noted, as you recognize the achievements of our Hispanic community, that we acknowledge the actions of our distinguished delegate, Bob Thomas, who I hope, with your encouragement, was the reason for his support of the Medicaid bill that passed in the General Assembly, aiding the indigent and needy immigrants of many ethnicities, including Hispanics. It was a compassionate action. Examining the specificity of the General Assembly's actions to ensure a work component that the Honorable Mr. Thomas supported demonstrates to all that this board and the General Assembly is a compassionate group that allows the indigent a hand up with the respect of employment as the measure rather than a simple handout. The same action was taken recently by your hard-working Commissioner of Revenue that you mentioned earlier, Madam Chairman, the Honorable Scott Majowski, who demonstrated not to just the industrious Hispanic community, but to all communities, of the disparity in our tax laws. Thanks to his public disclosure, our middle class, hopefully, with responsible legislation, will save citizens millions of dollars, to the clear dismay of those officials whose objective sometimes is to find a way to tax us more. In Stafford, our Hispanic eateries this month are preparing festive presentations, and our colleges and neighborhoods holding programs displaying our unique culture. September the 24th, I will be with Governor Ralph Northam at his Hispanic celebration in Richmond, which responsibly demonstrates the event is not and should not be a partisan political recognition ceremony. We simply wish to be good neighbors, with the emphasis on being proud Americans of Hispanic descent. And as part of the extended Cortez family that were the pioneers of Hispanic media in the nation, with one station, KCOR Radio and Television in San Antonio, Texas, that evolved into the media giant Univision, I, through my media activism, am proud to recognize this board's action. And Madam Chairman, we salute you and your efforts today. And please allow me to give a special acknowledgement to my Aquia supervisor, Cindy Shelton, who continues to demonstrate compassionate outreach that in my 34 years of living in the Aquia district is unmatched. We are so fortunate to have her to represent us. And again, on behalf of a proud community of Hispanic Americans, proud Americans of Hispanic descent, we thank you for your outreach.
Gracias. No, he wants it. We're going to deliver it to the church. Thank you very much for coming. Mr. Cortez, appreciated all of your comments. Now we will move on to public presentations. If you would like to comment, please remain courteous and respectful to members of the audience and to the board. It's important to just please keep track of your time at the podium so everyone who wishes to speak has ample time. I don't see a lot of people in the audience tonight that will be speaking, but you are allowed 3 minutes. The light turns green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will be yellow. When the light is red, your time is up. And if you could please conclude your comments at that point in time. Is there anybody in the board chambers that would like to speak to the board about any matters tonight? If so, please come down.
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane. We're 15th in the nation. You're number 12. You got to come to Stillwater this year. It's a private joke. Okay, I only get 3 minutes, but you can invite anyone else in here and they get more than 3 minutes. That's not compassionate action, that's favoritism action. Whereas today is the 71st birthday of the United States Air Force. There are 5 services that are the Knights at a Round Table, and King Arthur is that American flag. You know, I love that we have all this recognition, but I'm of Polish heritage, and I gave you my mother's name earlier today. And I only seek fairness in America. I served 20 years. And it kind of offends me when we don't get equalization and equal protection. But you heard it earlier today about the 14th Amendment. I just didn't have time to research it. I was unpacking my new lawnmower because I don't hire anyone to do my lawn anymore. I do it myself. Now, those of you who know Zager and Evans, they did a one-hit wonder. It's called In the Year 2525. Well, if man is still alive and woman can survive, they may find a Pence fence on 57 acres of Ebenezer land with no theater and with Uber service to your high-rise parking garages. You're not going to, in the year 3535, you're not going to need to tell the truth, tell no lie. We already see that today in 2018. Our politicians don't lie, cheat, or steal. Not one of them. It's amazing to me. With my classified briefings, if I would have took one thing out of NSA, I'd have been in jail. Wow, in the year 7510, if God's a-coming, he ought to make it by then because he's not making any more land. And you keep on doing development over and over again. And I need you all to go down Shelton Shop Road, look at what D.R. Horton has done, killed all my cicadas, probably some turtles, and there's so much wildlife gone, it's just amazing. Such great decision making.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board? Okay, with that, we're going to move on to the one public hearing we have this evening. It's the consider approval of a conditional use permit to allow motor vehicle sales on 1.29 acres in the B2 zoning district. Item 13. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. May I have the computer, please? This public hearing is for a conditional use permit CUP 15150-822. The applicant is Mr. Jonas Atai. The request is, as the chairman said, is a proposal for a conditional use permit to allow motor vehicle sales in the B2 urban commercial zoning district. The property is known as Assessor's Parcel 21-54F within the Aquia District. It's 1.29 acres, and today's application is being represented by Mr. Jason Pelt. This is a zoning map of the area. The red coloration on the map shows B2 urban commercial zoning, which is all the surrounding properties immediately adjacent to this property. In general, this is the Garrisonville Road interchange with Interstate 95 that you see in the white color, and this is property abuts the interstate right-of-way. It's primarily a commercial area in nature. However, you do see a mixture of residential and industrial zone properties in this location as well. The comprehensive plan recognizes the property as being located within a commercial corridor and also suburban land use recommendations. For the suburban areas within the comprehensive plan, it recommends that we have commercial endeavors that support the nearby community. They would be in buildings that are located in 1 to 2 stories in nature and be smaller scale in development and usage. This is an aerial photo of the site. It shows the existing 9,000 square foot building that's located on the property. It had been previously used for a vehicle rental facility. The applicant's intending on using this for motor vehicle sales as well as accessory repair for the cars being sold on the site. There is a shared access drive which serves as access to this property as well as the adjacent hotel and gas station. and I'll highlight the location of that here. During the discussion with the Planning Commission, there was a lot of debate and narrative about the condition of this access drive and how it should be treated with this proposed use. And a lot of that is addressed in the proposed conditions of the use permit. Staff would also note that it's our understanding that there's a shared access agreement between the three property owners. Again, the existing site where it's proposing the auto sales, the gas station and convenience center, as well as the hotel. Staff's not fully privy to all the terms of the agreement, but we understand that there's a shared maintenance responsibility. This is a better image of the building itself. As you can see, it has some existing bay doors, which can be used for service of vehicles if necessary, but also gives the applicant an opportunity to have an indoor showroom, which some of the vehicles will be put on display. This is a copy of the site plan from when the property was originally approved for development in the 1990s. I'll highlight the existing building today. It's in the blue outline. And as you can kind of see from this site plan, there's a row of parking in front of the building, as well as across from the shared travel lane, and also additional parking on either end. The Planning Commission had a lot of discussion about the location of the parking and how many vehicles could be placed on site. And with the nearby hotel, that got into be some concerns that wanted to make sure there was adequate space on the site for the parking, as well as maneuverability of delivery vehicles, so it didn't impact the travel lane that serves the hotel and the gas station. This is another view of the travel lane as you look out towards Route 1 from the current site entrance. The proposed conditions of the use permit talk about limiting the number of vehicles parked outdoors. So there'd be no more than 41 vehicles parked outdoors. That includes display and employee vehicles, as well as customer vehicles. The applicant has indicated to staff that a lot of their intended sales would be online. There will be customers coming to look at a specific car, but usually they won't have too many customers browsing a large inventory. So they believe there will be less traffic than you normally see with a car dealership. The conditions also speak to retaining existing vegetation along Interstate 95, so it'll help keep the existing screening intact. There's also conditions with regard to repair and maintenance, that'd be all done indoors, so there wouldn't be any adverse noise or visual effects to the nearby hotel. Vehicle delivery would be restricted to tow trucks or single vehicle carriers, or also driving cars for sale into the site itself. So there would be no tractor trailers. And that was a concern the Planning Commission had due to the limited nature of that shared driveway and the configuration of this property in particular at the terminus of that shared driveway. The conditions also limit storage of inoperable vehicles to a maximum of 10 days. The Planning Commission was concerned that they didn't want for some reason this to turn into a de facto junkyard. So that puts a limitation on those conditions. Requirement that disposal of hazardous materials be in accordance with the Fire Prevention Code and other applicable regulations. Prohibit the outside storage of tires and parts. Limit the hours of operations between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Again, trying to be cognizant and concerned about patrons at the hotel. Limiting refuse collection to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for similar reasons. And then also permit one monument sign, since there is not one today, and specifying the type of architectural design for that sign. And this is what the monument sign might look like if it was constructed on the property in the future. Staff, in its findings, believes that this application is consistent with the comprehensive plan recommendations for commercial uses in suburban areas and a commercial corridor. It's the commercial use of the property is consistent and compatible with many of the commercial endeavors in the area. We believe the conditions can mitigate impacts to the adjacent properties and the transportation network. And with the conditions, we're also stipulating that the service drive be repaved and that be done within 6 months of this approval. This helps guarantee that infrastructure issues that have been noted from some of the adjacent property owners will be dealt with. At this point in time, staff is not aware of any apparent negative aspects and is recommending approval of the conditional use permit pursuant to Resolution R 18-186 with the 22 conditions listed therein. The Planning Commission has recommended approval as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Harvey? Ms. Shelton?
I have a few, Mr. Harvey. Couple things related to the shared access agreement. We found a really old one, and so is there an updated one that's available for us to, is it appropriate for us to ask for a copy of it?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Shelton, I'd have to defer to the applicant to see if there's an updated agreement beyond the one that you're referencing.
Okay, we'll wait till they come up. And then you talked about the monument sign. I'm sorry, ma'am, can I continue?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and so you talked about the monument sign for down, what about the signage on the building itself? I didn't see a reference to that signage.
Well, the signage on the building would normally comply with standards. Staff did not readily see any specific need for regulating the design of that signage because this property sits off of the main road. Does not have direct road frontage. So the wall sign probably isn't going to be as visible as a monument sign further closer to the front of the property.
Okay, thank you. And then on the different conditions that you spoke of, where are those documented?
They are documented in Resolution R 18-186 in your
Okay.
board package. Again, there's 22 conditions for the permit.
Okay, thank you. The reason I asked that is because we've had a couple of issues where things disappeared from between the Planning Commission and myself. And so our commissioner, and you don't know, you're giving me that funny look. It's just there were conditions that just somehow never made it into the documentation. And so we checked it and I saw that that was there, but I just wanted to make sure that that's the only place it's documented. I recognize I'm new, okay, so give me some.
Yes, Ms. Shelton,
love.
this resolution as worded would be the
only documentation.
The conditions that would apply to the property. If there are some other conditions that were missed in translation, please let me know and we can work towards having them incorporated into this.
Yeah, please don't get worried about it. Not in this particular case, it was another case. So that's all, so don't worry about that. Sorry I brought that up. Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, Mr. Cavalier.
Jeff, earlier in your background description of the history of the building there, you said that it formerly housed a vehicle rental business, and I believe it was an equipment rental business.
Mr. Cavalier, that is correct. If I misspoke, I apologize.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed that because I've seen it for all the years it's been there, so I didn't see any vehicle rentals. The other thing you mentioned that I thought was, I'm going to need to hear some explanation on why this is a good aspect of it, is that you said that because of the internet sales now that there wouldn't be many people visiting this location. Now, how is this dealership any different from any of the other many dealerships we have in the area that also rely on internet sales, and then people come and visit after they've looked online and kind of picked out what they want and then show up at the dealership versus just randomly driving by, which this place you wouldn't see so easily anyhow. It's not right on Route 1 like the others there. But I mean, what makes this place, why is that noted as a good thing for this particular business?
Well, Mr. Cavalier, in our staff report, I believe we are noting it just to say that it's going to generate limited amount of traffic from this property. And the applicants kind of indicated that it probably would generate less than your typical road frontage car lot where you would get some pass-by traffic. Someone would see a car and, oh, I'm going to pull in. So there may be some logic to that. I have to rely on the applicant to talk about his specific business model.
Okay. It would take a little bit more convincing for me to believe that. Although it is located further off the road, you'd have to look harder to actually see the place. I get that. I didn't think the hotel would work off of Woodstock Lane either, and that worked. And the last thing is that you said that one of the conditions was going to be that inoperable vehicles would be limited to 10 days. Now, how are we going to enforce that? We're going to go out there and start up and take a test drive every day to see if we have inoperable vehicles on the lot? I just don't see that this is an enforceable regulation at all.
Mr. Cavalier, we would enforce it if we received a complaint from somebody who noticed that there were cars on the property that were in an inoperable condition. Typically, that's going to be a vehicle that's missing a wheel or damaged or something that's usually readily visible from the eye as you drive by. We would investigate, take pictures of the vehicle, come back within the 10-day time frame to see if that vehicle's been removed from the property. That's how we would proceed with enforcement.
Okay. Not just people randomly looking out their hotel window there. So, okay. All right. I get it.
Mr. Cohen?
Or the county will rent a hotel room eye on it. So I just have a couple quick questions. You mentioned deliveries and that they're going to be a certain way, and just hearkening back to a previous instance and knowing how difficult deliveries were in another car establishment. Staff feels comfortable that the deliveries are going to be acceptable and not be in the way of the hotel and other parcels?
Mr. Cohen, the discussion at the Planning Commission level was to try to keep the vehicles limited in size, so they're carrying basically one vehicle on a tow truck or a flatbed carrier, or they drive the vehicle physically into the
right.
To
Is
the
that
site.
proffered in there, or
yes, that's in the
okay.
that's in the conditions.
I thought I saw that, but I just after our previous issue, which gets us to test rides, because I know Ms. Shelton had this enjoyment as well with a previous location and test rides on where are they going to be. So is it safe to assume they're going to come down that access road and then go on Route 1 and do some type of test ride and turn around and come back, or?
Mr. Cohen, that's practically what would have to happen.
So
we can't control where they drive on the public roads.
Well, I know that, but we had that problem where people were going up and down a road. So I'm just trying to be proactive from our last experience where people were not doing what we hoped they would do, which was to go on Route 1. And lastly, I'm not quite understanding or visualizing the idea that you're going to have a bay for repairs and in the same bay area a showroom. So have they discussed that they're going to have two of those doors be for repairs and then the other one be, and then, have it walled off and marbled and made into a showroom, or you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Mr. Cohen, I don't recall a specific discussion at the Planning Commission regarding that. But we can defer to the applicant for particulars on how they intend on running their business.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, other questions? All right. My only question is, on the one last slide that you showed, Mr. Harvey, you indicated that the Planning Commission was in favor. What was the actual vote of the Planning Commission?
Madam Chairman, I believe it was 4-2 with one abstention.
Okay.
I can verify that in the minutes if you'd like me to respond to that in firm detail.
What is it? 4-2. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. All right, no other questions for you, Mr. Harvey. Thank you. Okay, now would the applicant like to present?
Good evening, Madam Chair. Jason Pelt, and I represent the applicant in this matter. First, I'm going to have to say that my law partner, and recently retired, and I'll give him all the blessings in the world as he is currently in a RV trailer in southern Colorado. Mr. Bob Goodall is recently retired from our law firm, which makes me our senior law partner, which I will gladly take on, and I appreciate his hard work and dedication. He did most of the advocacy in this case, and I'm just basically taking this ball to the finish line, hopefully tonight. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for the presentation of Mr. Harvey and his staff. I will tell you that we have been working very hard with the Planning Commission, and we are agreeable to all of the conditions. All of the conditions were vetted through Mr. Goodall and Mr. Attai along with the Planning Commission, so they're all in agreement. Ms. Shelton, if I could address maybe proactively the road agreement that you were speaking of. The only agreement that is in place is the one that you referenced. It's rather old, and I will tell you that Mr. Attai is committed to improving that road at his own expense, and the agreement that as a parcel owner says he can go to the other parcel owners for contribution. Now, if he never gets a dime from any of those parcel owners, that's his problem, not the board's problem. He is committed to repaving that road at his own expense and looking to the other parcel owners outside this board for contribution if acceptable. And now he's already gone to both of those business owners and has started that process right now. But no matter what happens with that agreement, the road gets paved on Mr. Attai's expense, and thank you very much. And Mr. Cavalier, if I can address your issue for just a second as well. And this is the internet sales issue that you're speaking of. And I don't believe that Mr. Attai's business plan will be one, as you say, he's kind of tucked away, and you're very familiar with this particular piece of property. He's tucked away off of I-95, or no, off of Route 1, and the way the foliage is on 95, it's hardly visible on 95, especially in the summer and the spring. So I don't believe there's going to be a lot of, that's an interesting car, let's go see it. I think all of his customers are going to be seeing his vehicles from the internet and then coming to view a particular vehicle, not view his entire stock. And then Mr. Cohen, if I can address your issue for a second, and that is the bays. If you know you have a particular customer coming to see a particular car and maybe the weather is not cooperating, you're going to have an opportunity to pull that vehicle inside the bay to see the vehicle in a covered, weather-controlled environment. And so I believe Mr. Attai is going to have at least one bay for showroom purposes only, because he's not going to have a big showroom like you see at the Toyota dealership or the Nissan dealership. But if you do want to have a spot, if there's inclement weather, we can still show the car in a covered environment. So that's probably it's probably one of those bays is going to be, you're not going to have greasy rags around. I don't know if it's going to be marble floor, but it's going to be nice enough to show a car in, and I appreciate that. I think that answered most of the questions that were before the board, Your Honor, or my lawyer's coming out, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, Mr. Attai is here as well, and he will happily answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have questions for the applicant? Mr. Cavalier.
One last one, Mr. Attai, Jason. Since you said that most of your sales are going to be internet sales, do you have any sort of history or are you currently in the car sales business in another location?
If I can introduce Mr. Attai, and he will be able to answer this question.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, I'm the last 20 years, I'm in the businesses,
20 years.
Car business.
Okay. Do you do any, internet sales where we're shipping cars overseas, or?
No, I think last year from out of country, we sold like a couple cars out of country. Yeah.
So most are local,
but
is that what you're saying? Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Attai, when will there be tractor trailers that are bringing the cars in?
99% car coming from Fredericksburg auction,
Okay.
and late model cars. I mean, with no issue, no nothing. I mean, we can drive, bring the car, and that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no tractor trailers?
Nope.
Okay. Mr. Cohen?
And I know we have, in my district, we have a couple places that will take cars that have been damaged for whatever reason, and they're brought to a place and then they're sent elsewhere. So when it was mentioned about damaged vehicles, I was just curious, what is that you're really envisioning? Because when I went down and toured those, they were damaged, they were fire burned and whatever. You can't really fix those up. So just so that people understand what you're talking about when you say damage, it might be helpful.
When I buy any car from the auction with the damage, first of all, we're not buying. If it's any car like bumper or, you know, some door, something need paint, we're gonna send from the auction direct to the body shop. When the car finished, we're gonna bring to the dealership. Yeah.
To summarize, Mr. Cohen, I understand and I am familiar with those types of dealerships that maybe buy a salvage vehicle and then repair it to get a salvage title. That is not Mr. Atai's business plan. The issue with any car that's inoperable for 10 days, that was not an issue. We could have gone lower. That was not something it's not in our business plan, so we didn't really address it. I can't imagine that he would have a vehicle that could not be driven at any particular time. So that was not something that we spent a lot of time negotiating. Thank you.
Just one more question. And where are your other dealerships?
Fredericksburg.
The applicant's address on Huggins Road is an actual dealership in Fredericksburg. It's in Spotsylvania County, off of Route 1 on Huggins Road, kind of in the 4 Mile Fork area.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the board's time and consideration of this matter, and I look forward to a favorable outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this point in time, I'll open the public hearing on this item. If you would like to come forward and speak to the board, please come forward now. The same rules apply. You have 3 minutes.
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane, gerrymandered Rock Hill District. All right, let's explain to the public, because that's what public hearing is. That's the first name of public hearing. A CUP is favoritism. You are favoring him. You like the internet? You ought to use TrueCar. Remember that commercial, that guy? Then you can look at your car and come get it. There's only 22 conditions here. And guess where we're going to put those cars? Well, let's put it behind door number 1. Oh, door number 2. Door number 3. Man, there was a TV show with that. Whenever I see cars near a hotel, I worry about crime, because that's one of the key aspects of this. We're not the rural county like Spotsylvania is anymore. Your enforcement ideas, I'll give you the empty sheriff car. You can put one there. That'll take care of that. You can never enforce the definition of family in this county. I have reported many houses with 10 cars. Many are inoperable. Also signs. I love the comment, staff is not aware of anything. Well, I'll use what my father tells me every day. Son, it's what staff does not know, because you do not know what the impact is of this aspect. You know, we have enough 7-Elevens in this county. Now let's just add another type of vehicle storage entity. We have all this congestion all over Route 1, and we have someone coming up here and saying, I hope you can pass this for us. God, that was the last president. Remember, we hope for these things. Now, 40 take up a bunch of space, which means we're going to have stormwater runoff. And I'm sure you're going to enforce 41. And they picked it because it's a prime number. It's pretty good. And 22 conditions. I think there's more than 22 conditions in regard to this. And like everything you do here, you already have it all canned and planned. You're going to sit here and say, I'm going to I'm going to approve this thing, no matter what happens. Well, you need to announce to the public who are the 2 planning commissioners that did not vote for this. You didn't even know it was 4-2. Announce it publicly.
Would anyone else like to address the board? Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'll bring this back to Ms. Shelton. This is in her district.
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution R18-186.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, with that, cast your...
Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just waiting for Ms. Shelton, so I didn't want to be... quite honestly, the idea of buying things online is actually the new way of doing things. I know a great number of people from the gym in my community who that's the new thing, is you look online, you find it, you make the deal. The idea of going to a regular car dealership is getting less and less fashionable. It's just the way of the world now. I do have concerns about the test rides, so I do hope that staff will stay on top of the test drives and deliveries, because I don't want a repeat of what we went through before. At least there are no residents on this street, so that makes me feel better. And I had not made up my mind until I heard everything tonight, because quite honestly, I don't think I know everything until I hear information from people. But I think I will vote in favor of this because of the different things, and especially if staff will stay on top of this in relations to what we went through in the Acquired District just a year ago.
Okay, Ms. Shelton?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize the protocol that I was supposed to go first. I want to make sure I got the last word. And I just wanted to tell people the reason why we're being so particular about this is we recently had a conditional use permit that, we had to pull. I'm going to tell you it's hard because I really believe in small business and I want people to come here. And so, but we have laws, and so that was difficult for us. And so we don't want to go through that again. So if it seems like we're asking a lot of questions and the planning commissioner went through a lot of angst over it, it was just because that was so recent to us and it was painful. But we want to welcome small businesses to Stafford County, and I welcome you, Mr. Atai, if we vote for you. So thank you.
Okay, with that, we have a motion for R18-186. With that, cast your vote. Is there? Yes. I think there was already a second. Please cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes 6-0 with 1 absent. And that concludes our Board of Supervisors meeting this evening. Safe travels home.